accidental overdose on pure muscle. I have vast experience with all kinds of psychedelics, from LSD to DMT, Salvinorin A to mescaline. I ventured through the deepest layers of consciousness and back again. Yet at 36, I decided to try muscle for the first time. They said 20 milligrams would be a moderate dose. Each pellet was supposed to contain 5 milligrams of pure muscle, but they were heavily overdosed. In reality, each pellet held at least 30 milligrams, maybe even more. That meant I consumed well over 100 milligrams of pure muscle without even knowing it. It was a normal Friday evening. I was at home, feeling relaxed, ready for a new experience. I took the pellets, 4 of them, expecting a mild dissociative effect, something like PCP but gentler, softer. At first, that's exactly what I felt. A slight numbness, a detached sensation, but it wasn't impressive. In fact, it was barely noticeable. I felt disappointed and even a bit bored. I turned on the TV, mindlessly flipping through the channels, waiting for something more. And then, boom, blackness. I thought I was prepared. I was wrong. The void. What does a place look like where nothing exists? Is it even a place if it is nothing? How can you imagine something that does not exist? Every idea needs a reference point, a memory, an emotion, a sensation. But how can nothingness be? Can nothingness even exist when its very nature is absence? This thought seems absurd, contradicting everything we can comprehend. Nothing must be something. Precisely nothing? But how can you think of something that, by definition, cannot be thought of? Until January 25th, 2025, I had no answer. But on that day, my life changed forever. I was torn from reality and thrown into a realm beyond all imagination. The origin of origins, the 0 point of being. It was a radical annihilation of everything. Every memory, every emotion, every identity. Everything that ever was, is, or could be was erased. Only emptiness remained. An emptiness that knew no space and no time. And yet, I felt. But what I felt was no comfort, no silence. It was a hell no human could ever imagine. A time loop, not a glitch in the system, but the perfect embodiment of eternity. A prison of the soul, merciless, without beginning and without end. Every second was repetition, over and over and over again. I experienced the same pain, the same fear, the same drowning. Death came, and yet I remained. Trapped in the loop of dying, each moment an eternity. The loop became eternity, and eternity became hell. Not pain or fear as we know it from this life, but something primal, something pure. The primal fear burned through my soul like a fire that never extinguishes. It was as if the soul burned, but the pain never ended. It was as if the entire existence took its first and last breath simultaneously. The time loop was a tormentor, relentless and infinite. It forced me to look in the face of the inevitability of being. Time itself became my enemy, every second a drop that fell into the ocean of eternity. And I drowned, over and over in this endless sea. There was no hope, no light, no escape. What remained was an isolation so complete that the soul shattered and the mind dissolved in its loneliness. It was not death, it was the extinction of every possibility of being. This state, this hell, was not a place of flames or demons. It was far worse, a state of total dissolution where even hope evaporated in the darkness, like the first and last breath in the eternal nothingness. It was not hell in the classical sense, but the ultimate abyss of consciousness, a realm beyond space and time, or heaven and hell, a realm where suffering lost all meaning because nothing remained to bear any meaning. The only thing that persisted in this terrifying void was the pure, raw feeling of agony. A pain that could no longer be explained because there was no language, no mind, and no purpose to grasp this state. In this bottomless vortex, fear merged into something supernatural, something that was no longer part of human reality. It was an ancient, nameless force that penetrated the heart of existence and shattered it into countless fragments. It permeated my entire being, not as a mere emotion, but as an all-encompassing truth that burned in every cell of my soul. It was as if the devil himself had pressed his hand deep into my soul, leaving his indelible mark, like a burning brand that consumed my very essence. The darkness was not merely the absence of light, it was an eternal state of being without being. Every thought, every memory, and every possibility was erased, until only the painful echo of my existence remained in the infinite. A black hole without exit, without entrance, without love, without hope. Forever alone in the cage of eternity, devoured by a darkness that allows no trace of light. You're not just imprisoned, you are the cage itself, and this cage has no key. Then suddenly, the cage transformed into something worse. The fear. Primal fear is no ordinary fear. It is not shock, not a nightmare, not trembling before danger. It is the all-consuming, bottomless panic that holds you in its eternal icy grip, without giving you the chance to scream or flee. Your heart races faster and faster until it becomes an uncontrollable, chaotic drumbeat, and yet you know that no one will ever hear it. There is no one. The darkness has swallowed you, and with every futile breath you sink deeper into a sea that is not water, but pure existential void. You are not just alone, you have always been alone. There has never been anything or anyone. You have forgotten. Your mind screams for salvation, for any sign that you still exist, but your thoughts only meet silence. They shatter like glass as you try to remember who exactly you are. But you lose that too. Your name, your face, your story, all of it is erased in the darkness. You fight against this void, but the struggle becomes torment. There is no resistance, nothing to direct your fear against. It grows inside you, expands like an infinite mass that crushes every hope. The space around you does not exist, and yet you are squeezed tighter and tighter, not physically, but in your mind. The cage is your very consciousness itself. The worst part, however, is not the void. It is the knowledge that you will never be free again. Every attempt to escape leads you deeper into this realization. This is not a temporary hell. It is actually forever. Your body no longer exists, but the fear remains, eating through every cell of your being like a parasite that never stops growing. There is no warmth, no sound, no way out. Only the endless echo of your own muffled madness resonating within you. You feel the dying through every fibre of your being, yet death is denied to you. The light that was once part of your life fades from memory, and with every passing second, you wonder if you ever lived it at all. Were you always here, in this infinite, empty nothingness? This is the most terrifying kind of fear. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of never being able to die. The knowledge that you exist, without existence, without meaning, and it never ends. Not fear of something, but fear of the absolute absence of everything. From the infinite darkness, where there was no beginning and no end, something happened. The body. A spark. Suddenly, like a flash of lightning, a tiny shred of memory broke through the eternal void. A minuscule fragment of something substantial. I didn't know what it was, but I felt that I had to hold on to it at all costs. I reached for it, clung to it, but it slipped through my fingers like sand. The whirlpool of time pulled me back into the burning eternity, into the never-ending time loop. Yet this time, something was different. I felt it. Something was there. What was it? A thought? A memory? My mind seemed to flicker, like a distant light trying to pierce through an impenetrable fog. Wait. I had a body, didn't I? But where was it? What was a body? How can I retrieve it? No sooner had I grasped this thought than it was snatched away from me again. The vortex of eternity swallowed me once more. The agony returned, but I held on to that one fleeting spark. Body. Body. The word echoed in my mind like a reverberation. Body. What did it mean? Could it be the key to escaping this hell? The thought took shape. I fought, wrestled with the unimaginable. Focus, screamed with every cell of my soul. The thought was now all I had. I couldn't lose it, for it was hope itself, a tiny shard of hope that shone against the merciless darkness. And then a new realization came. A thought that surged through me like a wave. What does it mean to be alone? Alone. The word tore through the darkness. If I was alone, then there had to be an opposite, the state of not being alone. Did everything exist only through its counterpart, even eternity? I was not alone. But who or what was there? Where were they? Who were they? Was it possible that others existed even in this void? Stone by stone, I built a new reality in my mind. Every thought, every spark was a building block, resisting the vortex that kept trying to consume me. I wouldn't let go anymore. I couldn't let go. The darkness pulled at me, the fear lashed through me, and yet I kept on fighting. With every spark, every breath of my soul, I screamed against the hell. I would not surrender. I wanted to escape. I would escape. It was a battle, raw and primal, a war between me and eternity. And with every second, every moment, I wrestled from the flames of fear. I felt it. I was stronger. I was alive. I was human. I am human. I woke in my room, on the cold floor, wearing nothing but boxers. 4 police officers stood around me, their faces stern, eyes scrutinizing. 2 neighbors hovered by the doorway, concern etched on their faces. And 2 strangers, who they were, I still don't know. And next to me, a blood stain with a footprint smudged through it. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. The officers' words were muffled and distant as they called for an ambulance. Later, they told me my blood work revealed dangerously high muscimol levels. The pellets were heavily overdosed. At least 100 milligrams of pure muscimol had coursed through my veins. They said I'd run out of my apartment, screaming for help, convinced I was dying. I remembered nothing. My apartment was in ruins, furniture toppled, remnants of chaos scattered everywhere. The blood was mine, from a small but deep wound on my leg. Every muscle of mine ached. My body felt like it had been shattered and pieced together again imperfectly. Apparently, I'd been in a state of waking coma for a while. Moving, reacting, but not present, not conscious. The void had consumed me, and when it finally released its grip, I was left broken and empty. And yet, I survived. But survival came at a cost. It didn't just make me stronger, it took something from me. A piece of who I was is now lost forever, left behind in that abyss. That fragment of my soul remains in the void, echoing in the darkness, trapped in that endless cycle of fear and pain. No matter how far I run from that place, a part of me will always be there, lingering in the shadows beyond existence. But having stood before the gates of hell, having faced the infinite void and returned, my soul became something else. It was shattered and reforged in the fires of oblivion. I was reborn. My soul is scarred, forever marked by that darkness. But it is also immortal. It has walked through hell and survived. And that is what makes it unbreakable. A Curious Mind, a Datura trip report by Jamie, posted to earbud.org January 23rd, 2008. It's October 10th, 2 days before my 15th birthday. My boy Dave comes to school and tells me about this crazy ass drug he found. He asks me if I'd ever heard of Jimson weed seeds. I say no, as he proceeds to tell me about his experience with them. He said he ingested one pod, about 100 to 200 seeds. He tells me he was on his way to his best friend's house and he walked into the neighbour's house instead without even noticing. He walked to the fridge, poured himself a glass of milk and then drank it. Suddenly, an old lady walks in and screams, "What are you doing in my house?" He frantically runs out of the house and to the right house. Then he tells me he did them the next day and did the exact same thing to the same house. Being the kind of person who will try almost anything wants to find out what it does to me, I instantly was interested in trying this drug and asked what they look like and how many I should do. He said to eat no more than one whole pod. I told 2 of my friends about these things and what they did to Dave. My friend Steve said he heard of them and knows where one is growing. Me, Sean and Steve start walking towards where they were. I was a little nervous since I've never heard of this before, but was still eager to try them. We picked a single pod off and decided to get our other friend Stutters, Shane, to come along. We sat there and told him about them, and he wanted to be the first to try them out. So we ended up cutting open the pod, and he ingested every last beet red seed, chewed and swallowed. We went back to Stutters' house, and about half an hour later, he slurred the words, I feel a bit drunk, and told us to go eat some. Knowing they were for real and did get you high, we went back to the plant and raided it. We took 3 more pods and each ate one of them. We decided to walk downtown. About an hour later, I felt very hot and uncomfortable. I remember Steve saying he was going to go home to see his girl. Me, Sean and Stutters were on Stutters' front porch. Stutters said he was going to be right back. I then remember waking up on his front porch by myself and it was dark out by now. Confused, I got up and walked home. On the way, I kept looking over and seeing all my friends I did them with. I was talking to them and smoking a spliff with them. I turned again and they were gone. I got real confused as to why they kept running off on me. It made me pretty mad too. I don't remember getting home or much after that at all. My mom told me the rest. She said when I got home, I looked all messed up. She said I sat down at the computer table without a single word and started moving my hands as if I was rolling a joint. I lit it up, passed it around. I was talking to Sean and Stutters about selling these things, she said. Her and her boyfriend did not know what to think, so she just kept asking me, "What are you on?" And I would say, nothing, Mom, I was just smoking weed and drinking with Sean and Shane, you know. It's my birthday, we're just chilling. "No, you're not," she said. "You're on something harder this time." And I argued with her, "Nah, I've just been chilling with Sean and Shane smoking weed, ask them." She looks at me and yells, "There's no one fucking there." I turned and looked beside me with a confused look on my face and said, "Oh, they'll be right back, I guess." She still didn't know what I was on because I simply didn't remember. All I knew was that I was actually chilling with my friends. She said over the next 7 hours I kept smoking cigarettes that weren't there and thinking I was burning myself. My stepdad stayed up all night on the computer watching me since I wouldn't stay still or sleep. He told me at about 4 in the morning I got up off the couch and walked towards the table. It was pitch black, so he couldn't see what I was exactly doing. He said I was moving things around on the table, so he told me to sit back down on the couch, which I did. He noticed I had something in my hands. Looking at it, flipping it around, and about 5 minutes later he heard me say, Is this the fucking lid to the butter? So he stands up, turns on the light, and there I was sitting on the couch with the lid to our glass butter holder. He grabbed it and went towards the butter and finds the pillow sitting in the spot where the lid should be. He laughed his ass off. My parents said they got a huge kick out of me. They said I was like a 10-year-old kid with a 10-second memory span. Another incident my mum had told me about was that I went to the bathroom and I was in there for like 10 minutes or so before I came out strutting my stuff butt naked in the hall. She turned to her boyfriend and asked, "What do I do?" And he said, "I don't know, I'm not touching him." So they told me to get dressed, and it took quite a while for me to come out. And when I did, I had my mum's pants on around my head. So they just had to get me dressed themselves, to which I later apologised. It was a school night, so my mum said I should stay home with them while they went to work. In the morning, I was still pretty high, but I remembered what I did by then. I went to my friend Joe's house after this, told him all about it, and we decided he wasn't going to go to school either, and that he was going to do some seeds with me. We were going to sell them to kids and make some money too, so we went to the plant and grabbed like 20 pods or so. We went up to the high school, gave a bunch of them away, then we ate a pod each on the way to Sean's house to see how he made out last night. We got there and cut open all the pods and put them in baggies. We figured not many people would buy them, so we ate another 3 pods each. The last thing I remember is Stutter's aunt coming to Sean's freaking out, asking us what we was on and to show her where they are, because Stutter's, well, he was in the hospital bleeding out of his eyes, ears, nose and mouth. I instantly got paranoid since, well, I'd just ate 4 more pods. I only remember about 10% of the whole time, but Sean wanted to stay sober to see what we do because he didn't remember the night before, which was good because we probably wouldn't be here if he did them too. He first noticed Joe was tripping out because he asked Sean who the lady suntanning in his backyard was. Sean had seen that there was no one there and said it was his mum's friend. His mum was coming home soon, so he walked up to Joe's house. On the way, he said he knew I was high now too, because I was chewing on my shirt like it was food. He said I looked at him, and with the funniest expression on my face, I said to him with my shirt in my hands, "Sausage?" He just laughed and said, Nah, it's okay, Jamie. When we got to Joe's, he was having a hard time watching us since Joe was in his house and I was all over the place in his backyard, his basement, and walking down his street. He came out back once and seen me smoking something, passing it to people who were not there. He started playing with me a bit, asking if he can have some, and I was like, "Nah, you're cut, you fucker." He just laughed and went back inside. When he got in there, Joe was in his bathroom slicking his hair back with hair gel. Sean didn't say anything to him, just watched to see what he was doing. Joe got out of the bathroom and sat on his couch. He put his arm around someone who wasn't there, and with a stud look on his face, he asked, "What's going on, babe?" Sean told me he actually fell to the ground laughing after that. The whole time this was going on, I had 1 hit of ecstasy that I was saving for my birthday in a dime bag. Sean said he kept asking to see it and make sure I still had it. I pulled it out a few times and showed him. Then he said that one time I pulled out the baggie and it was empty. He started getting paranoid and kept saying, "Oh mate, where's the pill? Where is it?" I had no idea what he was talking about, and we still don't know to this day if I had actually ate it or not. About 5 hours of him babysitting us, he was getting frustrated and decided to bring me home. He told my mom that Shane was in the hospital, and she and him brought me there. Joe's dad came home and found him talking to a telephone pole. My mama told Joe's dad to bring him there too. When we got into the car, she said I thought we were going to get my contacts, so she didn't tell me we were going to the hospital. When we got there, it was around the time when the SARS were going around, so we had to get asked all these questions. The nurse asking my mom the questions had no idea I was all messed up off Datura. I grabbed at all the bottles that were on the desk and I was trying to drink one of them. My mama tried to grab it from me, saying that it was the nurse's, and I held it tight, yelling, "No, it's not! I just made this fucking juice right here, you know." There were people staring at me by this time, and the nurse fetches a doctor. I get brought to this room, and on the bed beside me was my friend Joe. Stutters was in intensive care. I vaguely remember this, but I remember some. I remember the doctors and the 3 cops standing in front of me. The doctors gave me 2 cups of charcoal in a paper cup, said I had to drink them or they would have to stick a tube down my throat. Me, having still no idea why I was in the hospital, was kinda thirsty anyway, and forgot it was charcoal. I looked down at the 2 cups and I figured it was Pepsi or something, so I just chugged the first one and then the second one. Instantly I felt a sandy feeling in my throat and was disgusted. Then came 8 cups of see-through liquid, and the cop says I have to drink them too. Still mad they fed me pop with sand in it, I refused. I lied back in my chair and tried to look over at my friend Joe, but the curtain was in the way. I whispered to my mom to push my bed back so I could see him, and she said if I drink the cups first, she would. So I did, slowly but surely. I remember how gross it was, but still, I did it. They had a clip clipped to my fingers, and I kept moving my finger towards my other hand. My mama would hold it back and say no, and I was like, I just want to see it for just 1 second. So she let me. I was moving my finger slowly towards my hand, and then in a fast motion, I grabbed it and ripped it off. They put the clip back on, and I kept trying. Finally, when I gave up, I whispered to my mama again, move back my bed so I can see Joe, please. So without the doctors noticing, she did so. I gotta love my mama. I looked over at Joe and I remember seeing the biggest smile on his face as he said, "Your nose is broken, that's why you're here." And I replied, "Really? Why are you here, man?" And he laughed and said, "I broke both of my legs, man, I'll never be able to walk again." And all the cops started laughing at us. I forgot to mention, when the cops were trying to get me to drink the stuff, my mom said I was hitting on the lady cop and she was blushing and everything. I laughed when she told me that. But anyway, we got put into our own rooms. And when I got out of the hospital, like 6 of my friends told me I called them from the hospital, and I don't remember still. One of the nurses found me naked in the elevator trying to escape the hospital. When I did finally get out, I was still having major side effects such as blurred vision, which lasted over a week, dilated pupils, which lasted a few days, and for about a month after that, every once in a while, I'd forget to take a breath and find myself grasping for air. The doctor said we all suffered brain damage and should stay away from all drugs for at least 6 months. You think any of us fucked up kids actually listened? Well, I'll leave that up to your imagination. Jimson seeds are the only drug I've done that I've said and actually meant that I will never do them again. They were quite the experience from what I remember, but are no doubt very harmful to my body and very unpredictable, seeing how the levels of poison in the plant varies from year to year and even from leaf to leaf. I know how I think when people say don't do this or even suggest not to. I'm a curious kid and that's why I did them, and I know many more kids will too. So I'll just try to let you know what you're in for. And I suggest you don't do them. They are evil, but I know how I am, and I know some will do it anyway. I spent my 15th birthday in the hospital, and I will never forget that. I'm personally glad I did them, because I learnt a lot. I learned that even when things seem fun, that they can very much be fatal. Creation of Language, a Salvia Divinorum 20x extract trip report by Poet SB, posted to EARBUDS.org May 26, 2020. The Foundation. As a short drug-related history, I had, at this point in my life, been smoking marijuana regularly for 8 to 9 years, and had, of course, a typical 22-year-old's accumulated experience with alcohol. I had also used LSD and psilocybin mushrooms quite frequently throughout my teenage years, but had quit for the most part by the age of 17, after too many anxious trips and panic attacks. I'm a firm believer that intelligent, artistic, and mystically inclined people are far more likely to experience so-called bad trips at times, because their brains are more willing to explore and deconstruct the scariest stuff of reality and consciousness. To provide a little more background for this experience, I feel that I must say something about my emotional and social well-being in the late summer of 2004. I had just graduated with a near meaningless degree from a liberal arts college, and having found no desirous employment options available to me, moved back in with my mother and father. I had also finished a seriously negative long-term relationship at the end of my college career, and had my heart broken by an old fling for the second time earlier that summer. In addition, I began working the night shift at a plastics factory, which was filled with down-and-out characters, most of them struggling Laotian refugees with little or no education or opportunity. It was a time of deep introspection, occasionally crippling depression, and the overwhelming feeling that some active questing was necessary to progress to a newer and better level. Having had some minor experiences with salvia in college, I decided to order a sample from the internet. The previous experiences to which I refer had always been pleasant enough, but weakly effective and disappointingly fleeting. Drowsiness and comfort would set in, usually for a period of no longer than 5 minutes. It reminded me of smoking marijuana with some low-grade opium on top, only the experience was far shorter. Reflection and research had led me to hypothesize that I was not getting a proper concentration of salvinorin A in the dried, unaltered leaves we smoked in college. So in ordering the aforementioned sample from the internet, I was pleased to discover that the plant was available as augmented with more potent extracts of salvinorin A. I selected the 20x extract, the highest concentration available from this particular site, and after waiting a few more days, it arrived in the mail. The experience. It was late August or early September. I finished my shift at the factory one early morning at 8 AM, as had been the custom for the past 3.5 months. During my last break, I'd inadvertently locked my keys in my car, so I was sitting on the hood and waiting for my mother, whom I'd just called, to arrive with the spare key. She did, and casually mentioned that she was off to court and wouldn't be back home until after I'd woken up, late in the afternoon. Seeing as my mom generally worked from home, I knew that this was an unequalled opportunity to test the salvia out. I thanked my mother and drove the short distance home, where I promptly opened the doors and windows to get a nice early morning breeze, break out my glass bubbler, fill the bowl with salvia, and sit on the carpeted floor of my parents' family room. My back was straight against the front of our couch, my bare feet straight out in front of me. Stepping back for a minute here, I must say that I'd been researching the effects of salvia as of late, and was well aware of the suggestion for a sober sitter, and was also, of course, mindful of my past psychedelic experiences tending towards anxiety and fright. I was certainly being naive. Due to my underwhelming flirtations with salvia in college, and my recollections that a bad trip on acid or mushrooms is generally lessened by remembering the reality of one's psychoactive ingestion, I was prepared to smoke the salvia with no sitter present. Big mistake. Though, not as bad as it could have been. I can't say this enough though. If you're going to use salvia, arrange for a sober sitter. So I sat in this position in front of my parents' couch and lit the pipe. The familiar metallic, acrid taste of salvia smoke filled my lungs, and I struggled to hold it in for a few seconds. I looked outside my backyard door, and the trees were morphing and bubbling a bit while I began to feel pleasantly dizzy, not unlike a nitrous hit. It seemed familiar and consistent with my salvia experiences in college, and I thought, why does everyone make such a big deal out of this drug? I was totally overconfident in my ability to experience this drug solo in these few seconds. I'll just take one more hit then, and leave it at that, I thought. And so I did. As soon as I expelled the smoke from my lungs, The world melted, and I had the unbelievable realistic sensation that my ass and body were sinking through the floor, supported only by the oriental rug, which was also sinking under my own weight. Because I was pulling the rug in with my body weight this way, it had the visual effect of sinking slowly into darkness, with the lights and colours of the room shrinking into a smaller hole above my head. As this happened, the room lamp and a few other pieces of furniture anthropomorphized and reached out with their hands to me in a loving gesture, saying, telepathically, "Don't be afraid, we're here to help and guide you," or something to that effect. I was both aware enough and out of it enough to have this incorrect epiphany before I sunk in all the way. That's so nice of my friends to come here and watch me while I do this. It's so great that they're concerned. I really love them. That is the last semi-rational thing that crossed my mind for quite a few minutes. I don't know if I dropped the pipe or not. I wish I could tell you all about the peak experience, those 5 to 8 minutes immediately following the second hit. But the truth is that all that remains is a lingering somatic memory of intensely bright colours, unbelievably violent motion, and a feeling that the world was being snapped up like a prismatic suitcase, shutting itself up in parcel tiles, and that I was frantically trying to find the last corner to disappear before I was swallowed up by the oblivion. All of these visuals and movements were entirely obscuring my real vision. In other words, I believe I was moving around my parents' first floor with eyes open, but only perceiving hallucinatory visual stimuli. This was quite different from my numerous experiences with LSD and psilocybin. Even at high dosage, most of my hallucinations, they'd take place with either closed eyes or some surreal cartoonish exaggeration of the real visual field. With mushroom use specifically, I had always perceived colourful geometric abstractions, but they were always superimposed as a grid over the real visual field. Not quite so with this salvia extract. After the first couple of minutes, I was in some colourful place where the creation of language occurs. I will try to describe this as best I can. The world was populated with wriggly, writhing organisms. These were bizarre alphabetic runes, graphemes, pieces of sound, microscopic quarks of letters, all the component parts needed to make written and spoken language. They looked mystical, asemic, and occult-oriented, appearing at times like Hebrew, Aramaic, Enochian patterns. But they were also wet, undulating, and capable of morphing into different shapes. I think they were largely constructed by my mind to resemble the drawings of Rick Griffin. I've been reading up on the history of underground comics all summer. Spermy, pulsating, and paranoid. The organisms seemed gleeful, and even made some cutish, cartoony, squeaking noises. And it was this very glee that originally made me uneasy. Now this is where it gets really hard to explain. I had a sensation of a word. Fuck. I'm not sure if I said it out loud, or my mind merely constructed it internally. In any case, I was present in this land to see how this word was formed at its origin. I started by perceiving the whole word, especially as a sound, but linked metaphorically to these images, then something like fuck, then fuck, then just the f sound, etc. I was going back in time and in scale to see how the sounds are born, so to speak. The movement was exponential in its velocity, so there was a whooshing effect to the whole scene, which was very reminiscent of my earlier perceptions of the parceling up of the world. The image that correlated to this ordeal microscopy was a visual awareness that all of these organisms were arrayed on the bottom of the shoe of God. As he stepped, a word was born, and as he raised his foot up from the ground, heel first, the next word began to be formed. The organisms acted like gluey bits on the bottom of the infinite shoe, so that they stretched between the heel and the ground imprint before snapping back up against the sole as they were pulled free. This is what produced certain sound forms for words. So time was moving backwards through the word fuck, until I was perceiving the exact structure and feeling of the gluey organisms being peeled and forming the f sound. At that moment, I was that f, and I felt myself being peeled from the earth, sending me into the infinity of the parceling up again. And then the scope became so minute, that time and perception stopped. I was in the silence before the word fuck began, and after the last unknown word had been spoken, I could feel nothing but stasis, which was unbearably frightening. I had absolutely no idea that I had taken a drug at this point. I thought I had accidentally stumbled into some nightmarish hole in physical space which existed, but was not usually perceptible. I felt something like, oh shit, I've gotten stuck in this endless space between words, and I'm never going to get back. I was suddenly aware of being in my parents' kitchen, so I walked back in the family room and sat back down in my original position, on the floor, back up against the couch. But now though, I was really getting anxious. So I went around the corner to the washroom to splash some cold water on my face. When I exited the bathroom and turned the corner again, I saw my body sitting in front of the couch as if I hadn't moved. This did not seem troublesome. I thought, I'm just having a simple out-of-body experience here, and if I can crawl back into my head, I'll be back in the driver's seat, so to speak, and reality will become reality again. But no matter how I tried to walk towards my body, climb on top of the sofa cushions and crawl back into my head, I just kept spiraling closer or closer to it, in Fibonacci terms. This is when I really started to panic. Somehow I spiraled out and away and ended up in the kitchen again. I remember trying to look at the picture on that day's newspaper to orient myself. I looked back in the family room and it seemed my body was gone, which was a relief. The sensations of ensuing panic were really overwhelming to me, but I couldn't remember what had happened to make reality seem this way. I would almost remember, but then it would fade, and I'd be left holding nothing. The unparceling of the world, infinite Fibonacci, all over again. I was increasingly feeling that everybody I knew, every person from my whole life, was in on this joke. That they had somehow tricked me into this perceptual black hole, and that by remembering what it was that had been done to me, it would cease. That, and they were all hiding behind objects close by, and would jump out with huge malevolent grins and say, "Surprise, we got you," once I'd figured it out. These feelings, combined with getting closer and closer to the true realization of the experience, gave me this unbearably creepy sense that these people were standing right behind me saying, yes, you've almost got it. What a frenzied bunch of terrifying ghouls. I was frustrated and more than a little paranoid now. I sat back down in my original position and suddenly remembered that I had taken a drug. I remember hearing the words come out of my body, "You smoked it." I'm pretty sure I said that out loud. What it was, at this point, I wasn't quite sure, but I could hold on to this point as a bit of the substance. I mark this in retrospect as beginning the descent back into reality. Still paranoid, I felt that at any moment, someone was going to burst through my front door and be very angry and/or malicious, malevolent with me. I kept looking out the front door and seeing a mysterious van, motionless in the residential street right outside my lawn. What the hell was it doing there? I felt confused and scared, but decided that I was probably freaking myself out for no reason. Still, I was pretty sure the van was really there, and I wasn't hallucinating it. Within milliseconds, I found myself suddenly in my upstairs bedroom, breathing furiously and sweating, throwing my bubbler pipe in its hiding place like something really bad had just happened. Had it? Well, I couldn't remember. Had my parents come home? I went running down the staircase as fast as possible, nearly falling and injuring myself severely in the process. I could see the van, still there, out the window. I now felt that it had been there for quite a few minutes. Jesus, I couldn't even remember the first few minutes of the experience. Had something terrible happened? Had I run out the house and gone amok in my parents' suburb? Racking my brain, I came down just a little bit more to remember this. The drug I took was salvia. It was legal, and it would only last probably a few more minutes. I decided to ride it out and ignore the van outside, feeling it would probably go away and this whole thing would be over soon. I lay down on the couch and turned on the TV to orient myself. There was some weird movie on Comedy Central, and I remember Kiefer Sutherland being on screen with a woman, and I recognised Kiefer Sutherland as himself, and this made me feel like I was getting a better grip on reality. The two characters were talking about a TV show, I think, and I thought, wow, that's pretty funny and meta considering my state right now. And all of a sudden, Kiefer stops mid-line and freezes. Oh no, I think to myself. He then says he forgot what his line is, and the woman tries to come up with it and he says, no, I don't think that's it. And then, no fucking kidding, he pulls the fucking script out of his back pocket and turns directly toward the viewer, asking for help. I freaked out hard, and I mean hard. To this day, I have no clue what this movie is, or if a scene like this actually happens in it. But if you know, please post it somewhere to ease my mind. I frantically turned off the TV and stole a glance outside. That van was still there. My worked up brain had concocted a marvellously fucked up narrative at this point. While I was so out of it all I was seeing was colours. I must have ran out into the street outside and gotten hit by the car. Holy shit. Even if salvia was legal, this spelled certain legal doom for me. My only avenue was to go outside and reason with the driver, hoping he or she would go away. I ran outside and across the lawn. As a side note, the lawn was spongy and vaguely moist and organic and fungal on my bare feet. It was simply the best lawn ever. In fact, I wrote a published poem about it later that month. I ran around to the driver's side of the car, which had been obscured from the angle of my previous glances. I came around, wild-eyed, shoeless, at something like 8:30 AM, and completely startled the middle-aged female driver and the middle-aged female jogger standing next to the window. They'd no doubt seen each other in the neighbourhood that morning and rolled down the window to have a nice chat. I frightened both of them enough that they let out a yelp. "What happened? What happened to me?" I demanded. "Who'd you hit?" "Well, no one," they replied, still shocked. I'm sorry," I said, and touched the jogger lightly on the shoulder, as if she were the one that needed consolation. I spun around on my heels, ran back across that lawn, to ride out the last few minutes. Goodness, that lawn, how amazing it felt. And even though I should have been mortified by my behaviour in front of my suburban neighbours, I felt released. Reaching the door, I laid back down on the couch and called my then girlfriend at work to tell her what had happened. After hanging up, I was aware of having come down from the majority of the drug. I felt energised, comfortable, a little angry and anxious with myself perhaps, but drowsy and warm. I watched the trees outside the back door as they seemed to breathe and pulsate slowly with my own breath, and the breath of the walls in the room. Everything felt connected. I was glad to have been through it and come back to this place. The aftermath. Fewer than 2 weeks later, I left the factory job and got a job I enjoyed so much more. I made some new friends, got some money together, and moved out of my parents' house to go to graduate school a year later. Here I am, almost 4 years later, and life is pretty good. I definitely feel that, despite the horrors of the salvia experience, it gave me a perceptual wisdom at a time in my life when it was desperately needed. Final analysis. Salvia will lend itself to possibly helpful and enlightening reflections after the fact, but it is no picnic. Salvia challenged me on all possible levels, and I left reality as I know it. There was no safety net like there is with LSD, where I could comfortably tell myself that I was on a trip. I can't live my life the way I used to anymore. A DMT and Salvia divinorum at 100x extract trip report by Enlightened Panda, posted to earwid.org January 21st, 2020. My life-changing DMT and Salvia experience. What I am about to describe to you is not a regular trip. It is not a simple drug experience, but rather a life-changing journey from which I still cannot come back from. I'm writing here in hopes that somebody, somewhere, may have a similar experience to my own, and may be able to help me with the horror that my life has now become. Perhaps a little background information would help. I grew up a foreigner in one of the most old-fashioned towns in America, the kind of town where weed is on par with meth in terms of social taboo, the kind of town where your neighbours know every police officer, teacher, doctor and firefighter in town by first and last names. I won't go into detail about what town I do live in, but we're world famous for our chocolate, hint hint. I don't know if it's because I'm foreign and I see this town society from a different view, or if I'm genuinely just mental. I was raised to accept everyone, and more importantly, to know everything before acting. Now, I'm not a stranger to drugs by any means, having tried ecstasy, LSD, BK-MDMA, M1, shrooms, Mary J, methaqualone, and so on. The most important thing to note here is that I've never tried salvia or DMT though, only ever hearing of them, but not mixed together of course. So, I guess I could say I was interested. I like to push the limits. Our subconscious has so many hidden facets, and picks up so many things that we miss, and I genuinely believe there are secrets in our mind that we cannot truly comprehend. I wanted to see what mysteries my own mind wanted to tell me. Having ordered Salvia 100x, big mistake that I do now know, and close to 60mg of DMT, I had planned to mix the two. I blended them both in a grinder, and had close to a 70-30 pack of Salvia and DMT at the ready. Smoking out of my hilarious Bob Marley's penis bong, the first hit was immediately numbing. Holding in for 10 seconds and releasing was a stretch for me. I was already starting to feel my heart race, in fact. It wasn't until I pulled through with the leftover smoke that I started shaking uncontrollably and only what I could describe as a mild seizure of sorts. Within 60 seconds, I was on the floor shaking so bad that when I spoke, it sounded as if I was sitting on an overheating generator. In a split second, my seizures had stopped. My voice was calm, and all I remember saying was, "I'm gonna die, aren't I?" Those were the last words I heard before I left my body entirely. I had immediately felt something grab the back of my neck and pull me backwards with such force that my room shattered into pieces as if made from glass. The force pulled me further and further until I was no longer on Earth. I wish I could tell you I was in space and saw my spirit animal who spoke a riddle to me and I solved my quest. Yet instead I had been pulled so far that not a single star was visible. Everything I saw was utterly black. I hadn't begun to panic until just then, but funny thing, I looked down at me and saw an abstract shape which to this day I believe should be called a cractozoid. Upon looking up, a creature with no apparent shape was weaving a thread of the most pure twine I will ever see. The thread was glowing white with the purest simplicity, and I repeatedly asked the figure what shape he was creating, but never actually received an answer. After months of him weaving and me calmly watching, I noticed bright transcendent orbs of life fading from where he first started his weaving. His own creation was dissolving as he weaved it. The orbs stayed in their place at first. Then they started to move in random directions, slowly at first, but gradually gaining speed. Soon I bore witness to hundreds of thousands of orbs flying the speed of light in every direction imaginable. This didn't stop the creature, mind you. Hell, it didn't even slow him down at all. He weaved faster as the orbs began taking their place in the distance as fading stars. It was only when I looked around me again did I see that the despair of nothingness had transformed into a beautiful universe filled with stars and nebulas. I looked down upon the creature, to finally see that he was done with his weaving. The last of his creation's orbs of life were scattering away. The creature was an all-black mess of shapes and sizes, yet at the same time, it looked truly beautiful in its own merit. But this is where it starts to get bad. I'd witnessed the beginning of life and a calm, serene feeling washed over me. I looked up at the stars, saw them start to disappear away one by one. The creature started to exude sharp arches of red from its skin. The look of pain it had, I will never truly forget. The stars had begun to recede back to the creature, and with every orb that hit its skin, it flinched. Looking down at my body, I saw more and more of the arches sticking from me and blowing up with colours of green and red. The rapid flash of colours and the sheer speed of everything was crippling my mind. I began feeling pure panic and despair. The shape creature grabbed me by my collar and pulled me once again with such brute force that in one split second every feeling, every emotion I was experiencing was shattered like glass. I don't remember much afterwards, only opening my eyes after the shattering, feeling like shards of glass were stuck in my body. I was drenched in a cold sweat, and for the first time in my life, I felt like breaking down and crying. The next week was surreal. Everything was flawless and beautiful. I saw the trees as shapes, and the smell of chocolate on the street. It was all just pure ecstasy. My town's factory used to produce mass amounts of the chocolate, and the smell would wash over the entire town. Heaven. It's been 11 months since my journey, and I cannot continue living the way I do. My family's conversations are mundane, and the way humans live their life is just horrid. I have a mission though. I know what I must do, and I know that I will complete it one day. I do not know when or how I'll do it though. My life is genuinely horrible. I need closure. I just cannot live the way I'm used to anymore, yet I don't know how I'm supposed to live my life now. I have been drug-free since that journey, for the sole reason that I feel like I need to know what my journey meant before I can go on another one. My 20-tab journey. An LSD trip report by Pepperoni Playboy 20, posted to earbud.org June 20th, 2019. This happened about 8 months ago, and still shakes me to the core every time I think about it. Mostly about how grateful I am to have had such an experience, let alone mentally and physically survive it. Anyway, let's just start from the beginning. I was at a music festival at my local amphitheatre, and ended up buying really good doses for a cheap price outside in the parking lot from my friends, who were already inside. I didn't get any for myself, since I had tripped the day before and I prefer to space out my trips, but when I walked inside the venue, nothing could ever prepare me for what was about to happen. I met up with my friends in the pit, gave them the doses, and we were all grooving and moving as anyone would at a music festival, when I spotted my Lucy plug amongst a sea of people, and he spotted me. He started dancing his way over to me, and when he was close, he started dancing with me and told me to open my mouth. Now, I know what you're thinking. I really should have known why he asked me to open my mouth, but in that moment, with everyone sharing off such incredible energy with no time to think, for some reason I justified that he was going to give me some water, Lamau. I opened my mouth and closed my eyes, and tasted what felt like a goddamn sticky note on my tongue. Immediately, I knew what was up, and what was about to unfold. But then again, in that moment, I didn't think to try and spit it out, so I asked him how many he gave me. And he said, about 20 or so. You got it, brother. I did that for a reason. And he continued to dance like nothing had happened. I continued to dance as well, taking some of my friend's water to wash down the tabs, attempting to prepare for what only people should witness right before they die. Within 15 to 20 minutes, I had already felt it kicking in, and everything beyond that loses all meaning of time, logic, and really, any sense of the reality that I once knew. Immense energy surged through my body, as waves started to ripple in the atmosphere from the sounds that came from the stage and the crowd, and they began to take up my entire field of vision. It dumbfounded me in a way that with time, I found I could no longer dance, and for a couple of minutes simply just stood in place completely in tune with everything and nothing at the same time. As it got more and more intense, I had to sit down. And immediately, when I sat down, it all kicked in right there. I was completely and utterly gone from reality, and my own self as I once knew it. The minute I sat down, each thought that I had, I ended up being completely immersed in each and every one of them, where they'd continue to grow and flourish and become their own parallel universes that I'd lived through until I died in that thought, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Whenever I died in those thoughts, I'd come back to my body and back to the amphitheatre, only to be blasted off again with barely any room to breathe into another thought and another universe. I don't know how long I was sitting down in the pit area, but it must have been long enough for other people to notice and take concern as to how tripped out I was. At some point, I thought I'd gotten back up and started dancing again. I started to hear people around me talk about, "Oh hey, there's some dude in that chair over there, he's really fucked up. I reckon somebody should be looking after him." And I looked over and saw who they were talking about, only to see myself. God, to see myself in that state was unreal. I literally was outside of my body, looking at my shaking, drenched body grip onto a seat for dear life while my mind continued to blast off at full speed. When I came to the realization that that sweaty, quivering body was my own, I managed to leave the pit, and at this point, experienced what I think was sensory overload, and I regained consciousness in a grass area outside the stage, surrounded by my friends. At this point, I was grasping at straws, trying to recollect where I was and who I was and what was happening. But all I felt was that I had done something terrible. Several thoughts began to flash throughout my mind. Did I kill someone? Am I dead? Does the FBI know where I am and what I'm doing? Am I going to go to jail? One thing that stuck out to me the most was how much I felt like a failure. I felt a necessity to try and be in control of my trip, not for myself but for my friends, as some of them that were tripping for the first time. They kept trying to talk to me to see if there was someone they could call to get me out of there. But I kept saying that I was sorry, over and over and over again. I started to cry. If any of you have seen the movie Get Out, I felt like I was trapped in the sunken place, merely falling yet also floating, surrounded by a sea of black while I watched a small projection on a screen of what was going on around me. I couldn't talk clearly, I couldn't move. I just lay there in that field while I tried desperately to make sense of something, anything. Now, I'm a very experienced psychonaut, but nothing could have prepared me for that. Normally in times of distress on normal doses, I'm able to go with the flow and overcome it. But I couldn't this time. I kept trying so desperately to be in control, and the more I think about it now, I realise that's a crucial character flaw on my part. I felt I was obligated to be in control of the situation and look after my friends, but I couldn't. And most of all, I couldn't accept that I was anything but in control. And in the end, all I wanted was for someone to understand, someone to try and reach out to me, to connect with me on the level that I was on. But none of my friends could. Until an unnamed stranger came up to me, moved my friends out of the way, grabbed my hand and said, "Bro, I've been there, you're gonna be okay." I looked at him with a shock of relief and screamed, "You know!" And then, I didn't feel so isolated. I felt cared for. I didn't feel alone. And then, and there, the stranger had me take a Xanax. And thank God he did, because everything actually mellowed down after that. I honestly don't know what would have happened if he hadn't done so. Anyway, long story short, my roommate picked me up and drove me back home to ride out the rest of the trip, which I ended up finishing with Fight Club and a well-deserved mango. Sometimes, even today, I feel like I've actually never left the amphitheatre. Like, the life I'm living now is merely one of the thoughts that progressed into its own universe, and I'm going to live this one out until I die, and I'll wake up back at the concert venue. It took me months to cope with depersonalization, flashbacks, and to learn how to act human again. But I managed, and I'm ultimately grateful for the experience. I only wish I could describe it better and in more detail. But having said that, I'm sure you guys know how difficult it is to detail the unknown, let alone the psychedelic experience as a whole. The day I should have died. An LSD, ketamine, cannabis, and nitrous oxide trip report by Psychonaut. Posted to earbud.org, October 7th, 2007. I had just got my hands on ketamine for the first time. After a few ketamine hazes, I decided that ket was one of my favourite drugs. That is, until the day I OD'd on it. Monday afternoon began with a good friend of mine coming over to do some acid. I took 2 hits and he took one around 11:30. Shortly after, I brought out the K and thought to myself, I want to get really high. I poured out a large dose, the largest I have done so far. I poured it onto my table and snorted it. I snorted 2/3 of it and stopped to take a rest. At this point, my friend thought I'd left a third for him, so he took the rest of my dose. I didn't mind, as I had taken a lot anyway. We had a really fun, relaxing trip for around 6 hours. By this point, we had smoked a few joints and done a few whippets of nitrous. I had also eaten a lot of sugar and drank a lot of water. At around 6 PM, I was sitting in my sofa when I stood up to get something. As soon as I stood up, my whole body went numb, and I just dropped back onto the sofa. I couldn't move because I could barely stay conscious, and this made breathing difficult as well. I shouted for my friend to call the fucking ambulance now, because I knew something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. I was buzzing like never before. My whole body, in fact. My senses of my physical body were jumbled, so I couldn't make out where my arms and legs were. In fact, I couldn't actually feel anything. At this point, I was taking very deep and fast breaths in a panic. After around 5 minutes of doing this, I started to feel normal again, so I kept reassuring myself not to panic. It was at this point my mouth was so very dry, and I stood up to drink some water. As soon as the water went down my throat, my heart started beating extremely fast. My friend then told me that I shouldn't eat or drink anything from the other room, as he was on the phone speaking with a 999 operator. What bad timing. Why couldn't he have told me that 1 minute before? I dropped back down on the sofa and looked down at my hands. To my horror, all the muscles in my body had tightened. Speaking was so hard now that my mouth wouldn't allow me to talk properly. By this point, I really started freaking out. I'd lost all sense in my body. My muscles were all tightened, and my heart was beating abnormally fast, and my body was buzzing like mad. By around 6:30 PM, I was convinced that my body would not be able to survive this shock of excessive drugs, sugar, and water. I get the horrible feeling that I am seconds away from death. What's even worse is the overwhelming buzzing of my body getting worse and breathing becoming even more difficult. I knew my friend was qualified in first aid and CPR. I remember telling him something along the lines of, "You know CPR, don't you? Just keep me alive." I was begging God, wishing not to die, not at the age of 19, and not from a drug overdose. And here I am, my body buzzing more and more by the second. I am getting worse. I am going to die. Being on LSD at the time definitely didn't help. It made all of those negative feelings extremely negative. And when I would say to myself, "I'm going to die," my heart would start beating really fast. A horrible feeling of adrenaline kicks in as I take deep breaths, sitting absolutely still and just praying. The first people to reach my house were the police. Now, instead of checking my vitals and trying to keep me alive, they start to ask my name, date of birth, and all the other useless crap you can't afford to waste your time on when you're minutes away from death. In a moment of anger, I shout, "What the fuck is the point of all this when I'm about to die right now?" They then ask me why I took all these drugs. Sitting there, helpless, completely crippled and caught off guard, I just stare at the police officer. There is a moment of silence where I am judged by all these people, which makes me feel even worse. The ambulance arrives and the paramedics come. After telling them what has happened, they tell me I need to walk into the ambulance. I managed to stand up with the help of 2 people, although I was completely disoriented. I step outside my house and into the back of the ambulance. My vision is so messed up I cannot see anything beyond 2 meters. I also have double vision. The ambulance heads towards the hospital, and by now I've realised that my senses are getting worse and that the buzzing is getting heavier and heavier as breathing becomes even harder. I kept asking the paramedics, who was reading some charts, totally uninterested in caring for me, if I was going to actually die right now. Those people didn't reassure me at all, and at the time, when negative thoughts would send my heart into a spasm or something, that was all I really wanted to hear. I tell the paramedic that I may wet myself, as I didn't know if I could actually hold it in right now. We're now in the hospital and on a bed when the doctor gives me 2 pills to swallow and takes some blood. I urinate 600 millilitres. That's nearly 2 full Coke cans of urine. My brother arrives and I feel really bad, barely aware of my body, let alone what's happening around me. He was very heartbroken and disappointed after he heard that I nearly died from a drug overdose. My brother doesn't do any drugs, and that made the whole situation even more awkward. The buzzing throughout my body kept getting worse as well, and now my double vision only enabled me to see about 1 meter in front of me, but it was too much effort even keeping them open. In my disoriented state, I mumbled, "What a haze this is." Everything just felt like a dream. The blood results came back clean, and I stayed in the hospital for a few hours, just basically waiting the trip out. After all this, I've decided that even though ketamine is one of my favourite drugs, I won't be touching it anymore, because the margin for error is just too great. Also note that during the times where I'd convinced myself I was about to die, all I could hear in the back of my head was the sweet melodic guitar riff from Intention on Tool's 10,000 Days album. That song now has a very great meaning for me. A Journey into the World of the Insane. A Morning Glory Trip Report by Queek, posted to earwid.org, February 25th, 2007. I suppose I should start with my history, to help bring you into my mind. My most extensive psychoactive substance experience has been with marijuana, for a little over 4 years now. I've consumed alcohol, but extremely infrequently, perhaps 10 times in my entire life. This past 2 years I've delved into the world of magic, and an important part of that world seemed to be psychedelics and hallucinogens. The true hallucinogens, mandrake, datura, nightshade, henbane, etc., interested me greatly, but I wisely decided to begin with psychedelics, LSD, peyote, LYTMI, mushrooms, etc., to expand my mind so I would be prepared to truly hallucinate. I began with a few salvia sessions, one intense but short Kalia dream last night, and a very light but absolutely wonderful mushroom trip at the end of summer. After that I had no access to anything illegal besides marijuana for 6 months, so I looked into the legal drugs. Nutmeg was readily available, and I experimented extensively upon myself and others with that incredibly powerful substance. After that came a few DXM trips. Never more than a 4-ounce bottle of Robitussin maximum strength cough though. And finally, after discovering that morning glory seeds were similar to LSD, and also available at any store, I decided to give them a try as well. It took quite a while to remember to look for them, but once I did, it was a simple $10 purchase away. My first experiment was ill-informed. I ate 1.5 grams of flying saucer seeds whole, but mixed with applesauce for some reason. I think I chewed at least most of them a little bit, but they had almost no effect, or at least no noticeable one other than a bit of nausea. My second experiment was only half as ill-informed. I ground 9 grams of pearly gate seeds up in a coffee grinder, then put them in cold water mixed with some pure lemon juice, and let them sit in the refrigerator for an hour or so. I left the seed mush in, and it settled into 3 layers. One light greenish, one darker green and yellow with small chunks, and one greyish with most of the seed chunks. At 3 PM, I started to drink it. I made it through the first layer and a little bit of the second before the taste made me feel nauseous. The mix of lemon juice and the seeds was awful to say the least. After this, I had a sickening feeling in my stomach which did not go away for the rest of the night. This was accompanied by a body high that was more like a body low. I felt like I had seasickness, even though I've never really had seasickness before. I just assumed that this is what it feels like. I vomited perhaps 4 times in my whole life, always from extreme sickness. Within 45 minutes of drinking the morning glory seed water, I barely made it to the toilet in time to puke up everything I've ever eaten in my whole life, and then some. Ugh, a miserable feeling indeed. And the trip wasn't a trip, it was mostly just a body feeling. I decided that next time I would do the ritual fasting, eat ginger, and smoke a small amount of marijuana as precautions against the intense nausea. My third, and I believe successful trip went as follows. On Thursday, I thoroughly washed 9 grams of heavenly blue morning glory seeds with Dawn dishwashing liquid in a colander, and then rinsed those 9 grams extremely thoroughly, but being careful not to let the seeds soak at all. I then set them on a paper towel under the stove fan to dry. After 30 minutes or so, they were dry, and I ground them up in a coffee bean grinder. After collecting 99% of the powder, I transferred it to a large cup which I had filled with applesauce. I stirred it in thoroughly so that it was well mixed, and then I left it in my refrigerator. This was at approximately noon. From then on, I did not eat anything that day. I stayed up late, and went to sleep rather tired. At 11:30 AM on Friday, I awoke and rather spontaneously decided to consume the applesauce at noon. I took a shower and cleansed myself, got dressed in comfortable clothes, and went downstairs. I drank the applesauce infusion of morning glory seeds at noon, as I had decided 30 minutes before. I was alone, and would be up until 4 PM or so, at which point I would be with my family for the rest of the evening. This was not the best setting to be in while tripping, and my mindset was reasonable, although not the best either. But like I said, it was a spontaneous decision, and nothing drastic had happened during my last 2 experiments. So at noon, I ate a small amount of raw dried ginger root, gross stuff I must say, and then ate the applesauce, which 98% masked the seed taste. Very good. It's not a nauseating taste to me. Sometime within the next hour I noticed I was a bit giggly at the computer, and I was thinking a bit oddly, which isn't unusual for me, but it was noticeable. Approximately 1 PM, I felt disoriented and kind of like, what the fuck is going on right now? But not really in that much of a bad way. I stumbled out to the garage to smoke a small quantity of marijuana, and I mean really small, like a quarter of a bowl, still mostly in control of my thoughts and actions. I wandered back inside after getting semi-lost walking around my house because all of the doors were locked except for the original one I had exited from. I stepped in mud and got kind of confused as to how to deal with this unpleasant mini-crisis. I ended up brushing most of it off in the grass in my front yard and stumbling back into the house. I felt somewhat in a fog and had nausea, but it was minor thanks to the weed mostly. I was bored, but in a kind of depressed way. I craved social interaction and knew that there was none to be had. I wanted to be with someone else who was tripping, but no one was. I couldn't even tell anyone I was tripping. But nobody would be there to tell for 4 hours anyway. For most of those 4 hours I felt slightly nauseous, but it was minimal, and I felt no desire or need to puke, especially if I lay down in one spot for a while. I decided watching a movie would be great for keeping me entertained while I lay down and wait for the nausea to dissipate. I put not another teen movie on. I lay down on the couch and watched it. It took about an hour longer than it should have because I would rewind every scene at some point because I wanted to check if things I'd seen in the background were real. They were. And during the musical number, I rewound it and watched it at least 10 times, maybe more. Because one part was absolutely hilarious and one part was beautiful. By the time the movie was done, my family was almost home. I was feeling extremely spaced out and foggy, and I spent an hour laying on the couch looking at the wall and ceilings, which now had patterns on them. Not particularly trippy patterns, but very obvious, noticeable, realistic patterns, which changed over the course of the day, depending on what I was thinking about. Also, the sun shining through the window made a tiny rainbow on the wall, a prism effect, which was incredibly cool and interesting to me. Things got a bit harder to deal with when I had to interact with people. When my family finally got home at around 4, my mind was fully transformed into the brain of someone who is clinically insane. I felt like my thought had been changed from mostly linear to mostly random. I could follow conversations somewhat, but my insights and comments were random and off the wall to everyone else. They made sense, but the path I followed to get to my conclusions was completely erratic. The jokes I made were funny, but only to me, because half of the joke was something I was thinking about at the time. I solved this problem of sounding like an insane person whenever I opened my mouth by not talking as much as possible. The simplest comments like, "Thank you," were odd and awkward sounding to me, so I tried to avoid people. Most of the time I felt like I was watching the world from about 10 feet behind my eyes, and I could reconnect when I needed to, but I was still a bit distanced from typical reality. The whole time I felt alone and was somewhat depressed that I didn't have anyone to share this experience with. I thought a lot about the fact that I didn't have any huge passion in life or definite direction to go. Normally this is liberating to me, but the morning glory seeds liberated my mind so much that it wanted and needed something solid to anchor it. I had nothing. No solid goal, no driving purpose. And when I was lost in the land of infinity that my Friday night had become, this was scary and depressing. It is definitely a daytime drug, unlike shrooms. I've never actually used a sitter, but I have tripped with people and I enjoy it immensely, being a very social person. By about 8 PM, I was ready to go to sleep just to escape the madness. Literally, I had gone crazy, but not extremely crazy, and I knew it. I didn't want to be crazy alone, and it was unpleasant as hell to know that until I was done being crazy, I was alone. Truly alone. Because the thing that binds us together as a society is the fact that generally, we think alike. We assume at least some of the same things, and act usually in the same way in response to stimuli. Well, I was off in another world, thinking much differently from anyone around me, with all the oddities of behaviour that this entails. I wanted to go to sleep and wake up sane again, with some kind of self-certainty about my life path. Once in bed, I noticed something which was absent, aside from the wall and ceiling patterns, during the light part of the trip. In mostly darkness, things began to have colours that I knew weren't their real colours. It was subtle, but my walls were bluish and greenish, and a poster I have of a black and white fingerprint began pulsing and swirling in a subtle manner as well. The colours swirled a bit too, and the ceiling patterns gained some colours at this point as well. I believe I began to notice the colours because of the minimal light, and the colours were by no means bright or vibrant. As a matter of fact, they reminded me of the voices I heard while under the influence of Salvia Divinorum. I didn't really hear the voices, I just knew in my mind that the voices existed, and what they were saying. In the same manner, I knew that there were colours, and my eyes tried to catch up and show me these colours, but it wasn't a vibrant or intense knowledge, so the colours were subtle. It was interesting nonetheless though, since I've yet to try LSD or have enough mushrooms to truly alter the colours and perspective much. And yet the morning glory seeds did this, albeit only minorly. I woke up at 3 in the morning, which was the first time I knew I'd fallen asleep. My thoughts had slipped into hypnagogia, and my hypnagogia into dreams. So I woke up at 3, rather surprised that I'd been asleep. I checked my eyes in the mirror, and they weren't dilated anymore, but I still felt a bit off baseline, kind of an after effect. I went back to sleep and woke up the next morning feeling better, but with the knowledge burnt into my head that this was a trip that I should take with friends and during the day next time. The best way to describe what I felt like during the whole trip was insane. Not minorly so either, but severely insane. I was crazy. I had taken a trip into a world of madness from which I could not escape. The world appeared so simple and yet so unfathomably complex to me. I was crazy, and I knew it. Morning glory seeds are not a toy, and I got the feeling during the trip that the spirit contained in the seed experience is an old and harsh one. It was definitely male, with 2 sides. He is hell on my stomach and body. But the mental voyage is fantastic. It is not hard to gain entrance into the world of oliloquy. It simply requires intelligence. A Battle for Earth's Existence. An Amanita muscaria and belladonna trip report by Sleepwalker. Posted to earwid.org October 22nd, 2013. This experience took place during a time in my life that was very tumultuous. I was a college student at the time, and had been smoking pot daily for a couple of years before I was arrested for possessing alcohol underage, and for some absurd reason, was placed on probation for 1 year. During this time, I had to take a drug-alcohol test once a month. This prevented my habit of smoking to continue for a while, which caused me to begin to find other mind-altering and easy-to-obtain drugs that wouldn't be tested for. I first ordered an ounce of grade B amanitas, and ate about 10 grams on my first experience. This gave me a lightheaded, euphoric feeling, in which I felt strong, and felt strangely flexible, like I could stretch my body into forms I previously could not. The experience lasted 3 to 4 hours, and overall was very mild and disappointing, since I was hoping for a lot more. I then ate the other roughly 18 grams a few days later, and felt much the same effects with only a slight increase in intensity. This may be because I didn't give my body enough time to rid itself of the tolerance it accumulated from the first experience, but nevertheless, I was determined to experience the full effects this drug could give me, and so I ordered an ounce of grade A amanitas, and also a large quantity of belladonna root, which for some reason aroused my interest while researching its deadly yet visionary qualities. When these items arrived in the mail, I decided to eat the whole ounce of amanitas along with a small 2-inch long piece of the root to perhaps enhance the experience. I began consuming the mushrooms around 6 PM. By balling up each cap and swallowing them, as I had read this was the recommended method of consumption. It took maybe 15 minutes to consume the ounce, and then I chewed on the 2-inch belladonna root, which I thought tasted pleasantly piney. My mindset at the time was very positive and optimistic of having an interesting yet not overpowering experience that evening, so I made the trip to a friend's house to play some cards and watch TV during the experience. The 30 minutes of time since consumption rolled by without any feeling out of the ordinary. It wasn't until about an hour after consumption when I began feeling very lightheaded and my vision began to slowly fade. 1 second, I'd fall back into the couch and feel like going to sleep, and the next I would explode up with a burst of energy like I was ready to run a marathon, which my friends thought was very, very strange. The lethargic feeling ended up drowning out the energetic feeling after about 15 to 30 minutes. The effects came on very fast around that 1 hour point, so it had no bearing on the time that went by from that point until 3 hours later. The following is what little I remember of this time, as well as what my friends told me transpired. The first thing I remember is laying back on the couch looking at the TV with no auditory senses at all, and my vision very, very tunneled. This tunneling gave me the feeling that I was inside the TV, taking part in whatever it was being aired at the time. I remember glancing over at my friends as they would walk into the room, see their lips moving as they were trying to talk to me, but I heard nothing. They later said I had a very intense look on my face, like I was angry, but would obviously never respond to their questions, which I'm sure was a little annoying. The next thing I remember is what tunnel vision I had transforming into vision of an animated land of rolling hills, like a painting that I was walking around in. I remember feeling very at peace and not at all frightened or paranoid. There were many animals such as deer and squirrels and dogs and horses all running around happily while I walked amongst them. My next vision took me to a large hall that looked like the throne room of a castle. There were only 2 other beings in this room besides myself, and what they looked like I do not recall. I only remember that one was the master of everything, and the other was a subordinate of a more evil nature standing next to me. The head being instructed me that I was to take place in a contest that would decide the fate of every living creature on Earth, and that my opponent was the evil being standing next to me. While I don't recall what they looked like, I can remember their voices very vividly. The master spoke in a loud, deep voice that made it clear who was in charge, and the evil one's voice was higher pitched and raspy, like a grumbling of sorts. The rules of the contest were that the master would ask a simple question, and whoever could answer first won. If I won, I would return to my life and would be granted a long life of happiness, but if the evil one won, I would return to a world empty of all living creatures except myself, and would live an eternity in this lonely void. The master began asking very simple questions in which both myself and the evil one would answer at the exact same time, as if the evil one was really an alter ego of myself. I remember feeling so intense trying to beat this thing, but also feeling like it was not possible at all. My friends later told me that during this time, I was leaning over the living room table in front of the couch, rocking back and forth, holding both my pointer fingers out like I was punching a button every few seconds. How strange that must have looked to them. The contest continued for what seemed like hours, and seemed like we tied hundreds of questions presented to us, until finally one question was asked, something about colour, the answer being red, and I had a lapse in concentration and the evil one defeated me, and I just remember screaming in this dream world like one who had just doomed the world. At that very second I snapped out of this vision and found myself sitting on the couch where I had been before losing consciousness, feeling as if I was completely sober, and instantly I jumped and yelled the names of my friends who were not in the room because, well, I honestly thought they'd gone along with everyone else in the world. To my relief, they were in another room playing ping pong, and I felt the largest burden lifted off of me I have ever felt at one moment. It took me a little while to gain my composure after such an intense trip. The strangest thing to me was how I so suddenly went from a dream world state to nearly completely sober, and on perfect cue with the climax of my vision. I believe that there's some strange realms of the unconscious mind that most people don't know exist, and enough of these mind-altering drugs can take you there, but you must enter at your own risk because not every mind can bend without breaking. I later had a terrible experience of a larger quantity of the belladonna root, in which I thought I would die, and I probably did permanent damage to my liver and kidneys. How much effect the small portion of belladonna had on this experience, I couldn't tell you for sure. I do think it contributed to the drowsy effects I felt, as my subsequent belladonna experience felt the same way. It must be said that I will never ever venture into the world of Alice in Wonderland again, although sometimes I do feel the urge. Beautiful waking dreams and epic nightmares. A Datura trip report by Hunter-Gatherer, posted to earwid.org February 22nd, 2025. I personally have had much success with Datura. I love the plant and its effects dearly. It feels like a waking dream and does enjoyably absurd things to me. It has much potential as a tool for adventure and artistic creation, at least in my personal case. I'm a junior music major in college, and my life is very much about music. I love the earth, and my passions are surfing, critical thinking, adventuring, tree climbing, romance, etc. I only came to know and love drugs, mostly psychedelics and dreaming herbs, about a year ago. Cannabis opened my mind to the world of altered consciousness and other things. I've since done 2CE, LSA, LSD, freebase and Yopo DMT, Amanita, dreaming herbs, Ambien, nitrous, and combinations thereof. I started noticing my practice of drugs was much more shamanistic and curious. I felt empowered to try Datura for myself. I bought about 120 Datura Metal fastuosa triple purple seeds online. I've read Metal has a higher proportion of scopolamine than other species, which is good for recreational purposes. It was my first experience gardening, but I poured much labour and time into them throughout the summer, and some plants grew to over 6 feet in only a few months. They had tons of sun and water in well-draining soil. The flowers smell beyond beautiful. I truly enjoyed and loved my plants throughout, and they seemed to love my care, judging from their absurd fruitfulness. One fall day, I collected pods and yielded 10,000 mature seeds. I dried them, mixed them, and stored them as a surplus of Datura for years to come. By the time I was experimenting, I felt the plant and I had a very tight, warm and trusting bond. I dried leaves and flowers as well, and I played with very small progressive doses in different ways for months to feel it out. Confident and careful, I ingested 20 seeds, a quarter tab of acid, and some whiskey this Halloween, which is filled with energy, people and costumes on my college campus. Other than epic dry mouth, I had the time of my life dressed as Tarzan and having countless glowing interactions. So much love, but far from delirious. A month later was the day. I'd just broken my fibula and was casted, so I could comfortably move around my house but surely nowhere else, which seemed safe for even full-blown delirium, my intention. Away from my usual seed hoard, I pulled a not quite mature fruit from my plants. I had a light dinner at about 9 PM and went to my room, which I share with my younger brother, Daniel. Thinking he'd sleep on the couch that night, I started to eat the white seeds in increments of 20 at about 10 PM. I would gauge how I felt every 10 to 15 minutes, mostly by thirst, and then eat another 20, until I'd had 120 by before 11 PM, and felt I'd hit the perfect dose. I started out playing video games, very uncommon, with Daniel, while waiting for him to go upstairs to sleep. At about 11 PM he told me he was sleeping there, and I told him I was about to be Datura-tarded. He said, whatever. While hanging, I would say things to him he didn't understand, or go on tangents about nonsense but in clear speech. He didn't understand how gone I was, and kept being like, seriously, what are you talking about? I eventually started talking to imagined persons and friends and incorporating my brother into the conversation, which truly baffled him, yet I just thought, Daniel must be confused because he tuned out, and not that I'd done anything strange. He went to sleep soon, and I was feeling pretty out of it. Walking on crutches felt very drunk, and space and time felt funny. The atmosphere just feels weird, and thirst is outrageous. But I'd felt all this before in experimenting. Every object and view starts to be very intriguing and speaks something, but I can't decipher what, and it's totally okay and super enjoyable in my stupor. Things don't move, but still get animated, and there's a stagnant yet buzzing energy to everything, which fills me with a childish curiosity. After video games, some moving around, and some water, I decided to play bass guitar. After a few false starts, I recorded an unbroken stream of 45 minutes, some of the most beautiful I've ever produced on any instrument. It was absolutely emotional and enveloping playing it, and I love the recording still. The state opens up creative possibilities in a beautiful, truthful, hyper-focused way that seems almost opposite what I'd expect from delirium. The sounds and ideas come from somewhere else, and I did many things I'd never done before on that instrument. After letting the final note ring, I slowly drank lots of water and moved around. Coming back from the bathroom, I caught a glimpse in the mirror. My reflection looked normal, but felt humorous and dark, very dead and very alive at once. I can't remember what I did next. I think I laid in bed and listened to music for a bit. My thoughts were strange and scrambled, and I knew I had done Datura and was weighing its effects. My body started to feel very strange, neither enjoyable nor bad. I was too awake to sleep. Regardless, I had some visions, dreams, and conversations in my mind with myself and others. The setting would change, and I'd be with close friends in a dorm room in the woods, wherever, and friends would come and go. When they appeared, I wouldn't even say hello, I'd just be glad to see them and get straight into conversation. When they'd disappear, it was totally fine, no worries. I woke Daniel up multiple times, but he sleep talks, so we just mumbled at each other before he passed back out. Never questioning this, I eventually got up and went outside for a bit. Walking was a bit easier. The night was nice and I felt soberish, but wasn't. I sang to myself in the night for a bit before peeing and heading inside. The dark hallway was weird upon returning. My house felt mysterious and like it was watching me. I went upstairs for food, with my mother asleep on the couch near the kitchen. If she'd been awake and spoken to me, I'd have been fucked. But it was alright, and I soon went back downstairs. I'm not sure when these next 3 events happened. After the bathroom, I saw my reflection again, but did not recognise it. I took interest in the man in the mirror and talked to him instead. I thought we were connecting, but it soon seemed he was mocking me. I talked for a long while before I realised it was a mirror. I recognised it was a mirror because of its location in my room, not my reflection. I simply found it curious, not frightening at all, and returned to whatever. Second event. One specific dream I had involved a friend appearing in my consciousness. She was hiding behind things jokingly and laughing, and I thought it was quite a fun game. I would laugh and say, "I see you, silly," and such. She soon started hiding behind things in my actual room and other places into which we warped, and the game continued until Daniel butted in. She disappeared and I just figured she'd won hide and seek, and I was happy for her. Third event. I was on the floor and my older brother Nathan was suddenly in Daniel's bed trying to sleep there. Daniel was hiding behind a shelf in the room and I was once again cheerfully like, "You can't hide yourself, silly." I would talk to this shelf Daniel until actual Daniel angrily and drowsily spoke from his bed, but I just perceived that person to be Nathan. "Nathan, get out of Daniel's bed, you dummy. Why are you trying to sleep here?" Received a response of, "What the fuck, Nathan's not even in here." I didn't believe, and I would talk to Shelf Daniel about how weird Nathan was acting. Deciding to lay down and sleep, I see some weird shit. Visuals and a trippy pressure happening in my brain, both physically and with my cognitive processes. It's an awesome headspace to be in. There's also some passionate, positive sexual energy, but not the kind to physically act on. The visuals can be enjoyably dark and obscure, and sometimes very clear. I vaped a little weed, but didn't recognise any shift in perception. I fell asleep eventually, and the scariest thing ever happened to me. My dad came in the room while I was asleep, and was yelling for me to get up because he knew my secret, and I was in deep shit. My dad's never mad, but he was outraged, and I knew that the room smelled somewhat of weed. I felt horror as I realised my parents would know I do drugs, and I was absolutely fucked. I felt helpless, ashamed, and terrified. My dad eventually slammed the door and stormed off, and I knew Daniel was quietly there for all of it. The next day, there was no hangover in the traditional sense. I woke up and my first thoughts were, "Man, that was so amazing, it went so well, and now I'm done tripping." My body felt great, my brain was working, I was motivated, etc. I thought the day was just glowing and happy, but soon realised my vision had an intense yellow tint. It was actually quite beautiful and evoked feelings of happiness, warmth, sunlight, and clarity in everything I looked at. My vision felt particularly sharp at first. I later tried to read text and focus on letters and images, and I realised my vision was super whack. Text looks like it's in a majestic cursive font, but mirrored and layered over itself infinitely, and each iteration is a different colour. I can't read for shit, but it was actually very pretty and meaningful to look at. Some objects were pretty blurry, and my eyes were slightly dilated. I particularly loved looking at my bass strings, which looked like a red, green and blue string for each one, creating a massive blurry yet defined string, both vibrating and very fixed at once. I had a conversation with Daniel at 11 AM, in which I was worried it was super late and that I'd lost track of time. I understood it was 11 something, but was super confused about everything he was saying, and he was confused by my responses until he said, "Dude, it's 11 AM. I then realised I was actually still tripping a bit. Soon after this, I asked my dad if he'd come into my room and yelled at me last night, but he said he hadn't. Later, I was doing some computer work on my floor when suddenly my mum came into the room. Her presence just kinda glided through the door and into a pile of clothes in my room, and even though I never physically saw her, I followed her movements of my eyes and didn't question at all that it was her. I thought she was hiding in my clothes pile, and I calmly just said, "Hey, Mum, I can see you. I'm kinda busy now, but I know you're there. Oh well, I guess you can chill." She stayed for a while, and I talked to her intermittently, until I realised she was never there. The realisation that I thought my adult mother was hiding quietly within a small pile of clothes on my floor kinda scared me. Damn, would I mildly trip like this all day? But lo and behold, that was the last of the weirdness. The way things morphed and progressed was like a deep psychedelic dream. I thoroughly enjoyed my night and got a beautiful piece of music out of it. I will do it again with caution. Were I to never do the drug again, I would still grow them, as they are beautiful and feel strangely alive. The only horror I experienced with this drug was an epic and extended nightmare with Datura as a key theme. Now that was heavy. A few normal weeks later, I arrived home for winter break, just today. I finished writing a paper, submitted it at 3 PM, and napped completely sober at 4 PM. I had the most extended and hellish nightmare of my life, waking up at 7 PM to still be trapped in terror. I can't capture here and explain how weird, amorphous, alien, and dreamy the whole thing was. Feelings of space, time, and self were so cloudy and just fucked up throughout. I survived, but I was shaken because even the sober reality portion convinced me I was still in perdition. Why did this happen, and would it happen again? I've done drugs before in my dreams, but they're always just weird, fun, and trippy, not accurate to real-life effects. But so many parts of this dream felt like my Datura experience, but evil, especially the vision. I'm still wondering whether there is actual residual Datura in my brain. Is it out, and my brain just knows the pathways of it more clearly than any real drug I do in both dreams and reality? Or is it still chemically there and fucking with me? And weeks after this trip, preceded by normalness, why now? And why so extreme? Is this plant truly evil? Able to telecommunicate delirium and nightmare? It's a stretch, and I'm normally not this superstitious. But this was as truly a fucked up, legit, timeless bad trip through circles of delirium and a continuing, seamless fabric of nightmare and frightened reality. It's probably all coincidence, but it's alarmingly close to real Datura accounts. The plants are still outside my house, now skeletons in the cold. Anyway, thanks for reading. Peace and love. the darkest experience of my life. A mescaline and 4-ACO DMT trip report by Sam, posted at earbud.org December 10th, 2018. I wanted to share this with my fellow psychonauts, in the interests of safety of fellow explorers, to promote caution when mixing psychedelics. This experience took place earlier in the summer, in a very comfortable setting, in my bedroom and garden one summer afternoon and evening. I was sharing this experience with my then new girlfriend, who is a clinical psychologist who works with psilocybin in a therapeutic context, and someone I share a very special bond with. This would be our very first powerful psychedelic experience together. Given that we both had a day to spare and the weather was fantastic, we decided to have a trip together. She has a fondness for San Pedro. I've had a gram of synthetic mescaline hydrochloride for a while now, so we split that between us. This was nice and quite gentle. Perhaps it had degraded in the time that I've had it. It wasn't as powerful as I was expecting. It was very pleasant though, and we were certainly both quite altered, but not really tripping per se. Senses were definitely heightened, and we were enjoying lounging around listening to music and chatting. I hear some of our hens and ducks outside kicking off, and I had a feeling something was off, and went outside to find one of the hen's chicks was missing. I have a chat with my friend and neighbour about this, and just as we are discussing it, we hear the sound of a distressed bird while our dogs are in the bushes nearby. I go into the bush and find the missing chick with its foot caught in a bin liner wrapped around the stem of a bush. Due to the luck of being in the right place at the right time, I was able to find it and free it. 6 or so hours in, after the chick incident, we head outside to lie in the sun by the pond. My girlfriend suggests we maybe smoke a joint, which sounds like a fine idea to me, but I suggest we have a capsule of 4-ACO DMT instead, so as to hopefully amp up the psychedelia a bit. I was hoping for and expecting a bit of an expansion of what we'd already had going on. My lady was down with this plan, so I went to measure out 2 capsules, in no way what I considered excessive amounts, but weighing out powerful psychedelics while on mescaline I don't think was really wise. I head back outside, capsules in hand, to enjoy what I thought would be a beautiful summer's evening in a stunning spot in nature. We swallow our capsules and bask in the evening sun, taking in all the sights, sounds and scents of nature around us. Around 15 to 20 minutes later, I knew we were in for a wild ride, as powerful geometric patterns were forming with open eyes against the backdrop of a blue sky. This concerned me a little bit, as I felt at that point the capsule should really have only just dissolved, and yet I was already coming up extremely hard. I hadn't counted on or desired this, but the setting at least was close to optimal. Things escalate rapidly though. I hear this electrical, mechanical thrumming or whirring, and it sounded very real, like it was coming from outside of myself. A minute later, my girlfriend asked whether I could hear this mechanical whirring as well. We were rapidly entering a very powerful psychedelic experience. The headspace for me had a very pushy feel that was unpleasant and very in my face, and there was a dark, chaotic tint to it. Behind closed eyes, I found myself in a very similar realm or space to a strong vaped DMT experience, only this was only getting stronger with time. I started to vocalize, throat sing, and this started to sculpt and shape the patterns that I saw. Gave me some small feeling of being able to navigate the chaos to some degree, which was helpful. My girlfriend was having a really hard time. She's had previous issues on ayahuasca, mushrooms and holotropic breathwork, where she really struggles with breathing, and she feels this is linked to birth trauma resurfacing. She subsequently learned that her birth was a very traumatic one. She was worried about her breathing, so I did my best to comfort and reassure her, and I embraced her and started throat singing again, as much as for my own reassurance as hers, and it seemed to actually help her too. Sometime later, she moved past this phase and the sun started to go down, and it was getting cold. There was a slight let-up in intensity, but we were both still deep in it. We headed indoors to get cozy and listen to some music. Well, I was still in a deep state. Music was not the guiding, helpful force it sometimes definitely can be in these states. I was lying in the fetal position in bed, hyperventilating. The dark, pushy edge to the experience was still very much present and unrelenting, and this combo felt like it was hard on my body and mind. It was dark now, and around 9 or so hours after taking the mescaline, and 3 or so hours since taking the 4-ACO DMT, I was just doing my best to ride out this whole experience, and without warning, something changed suddenly. My mental state became saturated with a very tangible feeling of darkness, impending doom, despair and hopelessness. I felt weak, and lying there felt like something between a decaying old corpse or an aborted human fetus. I truly felt like I was in the shadow of death itself. It really felt like I was poisoned and in a great deal of danger. I've never ever had such an experience before. This feeling of dying was nothing to do with an ego loss type of dying, and it was worrying to be feeling such horrific things at such a late stage of an experience. I also felt like my blood pressure was very, very high. I sat up on the edge of the bed feeling very tangible feelings of doom, and just tried to stay in the present, to just be in the moment, take each moment as it came. I was getting these painful twinges in my heart, and some weird electric twinges in my brain. Heart attack or seizure definitely seemed imminent now, and it was like my system was being worked to the very point of collapse, and it felt like death could occur at any moment. I kept these feelings to myself for a while, until my girlfriend clocked on to something being wrong. She did her best to reassure me, making the valid point that we both had ingested the same quantities of substances, and she was fine, if a little ruffled after a previous grueling experience. In her view, I was suffering from a panic attack, which may very well have been the case, and perhaps the psychedelic headspace had amplified this. To me though, it did not feel like a bad trip. It was scary in that, unlike other gnarly experiences with psychedelics I've had, it really felt like it was my physical self that was in danger, that my system was poisoned. This went on for some time, and it was truly the darkest, most terrifying, most grueling experience of my entire life. I'm a well-travelled psychonaut, and my feathers are not easily ruffled, but this was really, really scary. To me, it genuinely felt like a physical poisoning that was being made mentally manifest by the psychedelic experience. I recall another rather harrowing time mixing mescaline, as it happens, but falling well short of this experience, at least for me personally. And this time that was with LSD. This was not a winning combination for any of our party on that occasion, it must be said. There was a dark tint to the experience. Physically, it felt hard on one's system, like blood pressure was elevated. Mentally, it was like being caught in the midst of two powerful psychic tides. My dear sister had a much worse time than either myself or my friend on that occasion. She was on the SSRI citalopram at the time, a very foolish oversight on my part. She's used with psilocybin and LSD alone previously to no bad effect. I think she may have experienced serotonin syndrome. She got very, very hot. I could see the steam pouring off her, in fact. I went to get a glass of water and came back to the room in haste following a commotion, to find my sister trying to jump out the window, as she was under the impression she was on fire and burning up, and she needed to get people's attention. So, in this case, it was like the mental experience of her trip was manifesting as the feeling of being on fire, when she seemed to be suffering from hypothermia. At some point, things started to drop off in intensity, much to my relief, but after a great deal of mental and physical anguish and torture, I must say. That night, as I tried to sleep, I kept drifting back into that state of darkness and mental anguish and heart twinges. I took a Valium to help me get off to sleep. Thankfully, I awoke with no side effects other than some substantial residual humbling. I wanted to share this as a warning to fellow psychonauts, to be cautious when mixing different psychedelics. Certainly, I will take much more care with future explorations. Anyway, stay safe, everyone. Mouth of Madness, a Datura trip report by TIMI, posted to earwid.org January 10th, 2004. In high school, I had a friend who had been reading Carlos Castaneda. Carlos wrote about the Yaqui shaman Don Juan Matus, who would access the spirit world by ingesting peyote, datura, etc. So he, inspired by Don Juan, went on one of his expeditions to find herbs, and came back with a Tupperware full of the spiny pods. It would be a huge understatement to say that we were unprepared for the extent of the experience. I ate a heaping tablespoon of fresh, mature seeds. Lucy and Polo had eaten similar amounts as well. 90% of this was told to me by my best friend, Dougie, who witnessed my descent into madness. Basically, what I remember is eating the seeds around midnight with Lucy and Polo. It was kind of like being really drunk, except for the total lack of equilibrium. Serious dryness and soreness of the mouth and throat were present, and some lucid hallucinations. It didn't feel enjoyable, just uncomfortable really. I kept smoking cigarettes that would disappear, and I talked to a friend of mine from day camp who I hadn't seen in maybe 7 years, before he disappeared and I realised he wasn't ever there to begin with. I vaguely remembered finding my upstairs toilet had been puked on, not in, with $1 floating on top. I also vaguely remember cleaning it up, washing the dollar bill off, and hanging it to dry. I really wasn't sure if this had happened, and when I went to check it, the dollar was gone, and the toilet was a little too clean. Later, Lucy said she vaguely remembered puking in my bathroom, but was still not sure if it was real or not. The dollar is still missing. Polo, Lucy, and I all got extremely fatigued and sleepy, so we all went to bed. I had a dream where I kept walking into the wall. I was woken up the next morning by the phone ringing. Lucy and Polo were gone. I picked up the phone. Dougie. Tim, are you alright? Fine, I guess. What's wrong? What is my name? Tell me my name. Oh, fuck you, Dougie, stop fucking with me. I'm not. What do you remember from last night? I'm not listening to this. Just do me a favour and look on top of the fridge. You put my dog's food dish on top of the fridge. Good one, cockhead. No, asshole. You did. Whatever, goodbye. I'm coming over now. I go upstairs where my mom's house is in total disarray. I find the wall-mounted phone hanging off the hook, the front door standing wide open, the table in the entryway overturned, a broken vase on the floor. And it was Halloween, so we had this dish of candy corn, and someone went through maybe 75 pieces of candy corn and bit off only the orange half. I start freaking out. I had really thought that Dougie was just joking me, but he never took jokes that far. So Dave comes over and helps me clean up. I found all of the pieces of the vase broken where they lay, except for a very large section that was hidden behind the curtain on the other side of the room. Strange. After we'd cleaned things up, Dougie proceeded to tell me what exactly had happened. He'd come back over to my house maybe an hour after I'd gone to bed. Apparently he found me wearing only my boxers, frantically trying to locate something in my kitchen. Things had not been broken yet. He said my name, but I paid no attention, only continued to open and slam drawers and cabinets. Tim, he shouted. I turned around looking at him with annoyance. What? What are you doing? I'm looking for my Windows 95 disk. I said this with an expression and tone of voice of someone who had just been asked what his penis was for. I rolled my eyes and walked off toward my dinner table, stopping for a moment to hock a loogie on the wall. Dougie was very, very confused. Don't fucking leave, I said, looking at the table. I'm not, said Dougie. Not you, the candlesticks. I said this in the same, must I always restate the obvious sort of tone. Tim, what the hell is actually wrong with you? Who are you? I'm your best friend. I tried to remember. John? No. Jake? No. You don't even know anybody named Jake. I'm Dougie. I'm Dougie. What the fuck? Oh yeah, Dougie. I spit another substantial hocker onto the wallpaper. "Tim, this is your house. Have some respect. Stop spitting on the walls." Okay. I spit on the floor. "What the fuck, Tim?" "Hey, at least I didn't spit on the wall." I grab a spoon off the table and seem to be trying to smoke it. I make as if I'm lighting it with an invisible lighter and take a deep breath. I offer David the spoon. "No thanks." He takes the spoon away from me. I walked away and grabbed my dog's food bowl and went downstairs, down to my fridge where I carefully placed the dish on top. "She doesn't need it, and I don't like her anyway," I said, either anticipating his question or maybe just talking to myself. I opened my fridge and began digging into the pockets of my boxers, except they didn't actually have pockets. "I'm so thirsty, I don't think I have any change." I look at Dougie. "You don't need change, this is your house. That's your pop." Okay. Well, do you have 50 cents? "Sure." He reaches in and pulls out a brisk iced tea and opens it for me. I take a single sip, set it down, pull out a fresh can, open it, take a single sip, set it down, and reach for another. Dougie stops me. "You know, you've actually lost your mind, you realise," says Dougie, and I cackle maniacally, spitting on the fridge. I walk toward my bedroom, missing the doorway and walking squarely into the wall. David helps me. Apparently Apollo and Lucy had already left. "Where did Lucy go, Tim?" She went to see the shadow people." Not long after this, I think, Dougie managed to get me into bed and go to sleep, and he went home. It was a school night. I'm not sure if I got back up and did those things upstairs, or if Polo and Lucy came back and did them. I guess I'll never know for certain. Lucy woke up in her bed, legs and feet muddy and scraped, with no recollection of how she got there at all. Polo woke up at home too. These people didn't drive, and they didn't live close to me either. Very, very odd. I'm probably forgetting parts, to be honest. I've heard Dougie tell this story so many times, but I'm pretty sure I did other stuff too. The story gained something of legendary status at my high school. Here's some highlights from some of my other friends' stories. Giuseppe ate some and put on Working Man's Dead, proceeding to talk to Jerry Garcia all night long via his radio. Schloppy, sitting shotgun in a moving car, saw a dark man with a Tommy gun sitting in the back seat. He quickly bailed from the car. Junebug ate some before his family dinner. He was in my friend Odell's basement smoking a bong. When he passed it, the basement and all the other people disappeared, and he was sitting at his dining room table, arm outstretched, while his family stared at him. He had to excuse himself from the table to lock himself in his bedroom. Other drugs you eat and you're like, that's trippy, I guess. On Jimson weed, you're like, hey, that's normal. You never know that you're hallucinating. It's just like a waking dream. This is not recommended, unless you're a shaman. Trapped in My Personal Hell. An Amanita Muscaria trip report by Agent Gull. Posted to EARBUDS.org September 20th, 2024. I remember how giddy I was when the box of dried amanitas had finally arrived in the post office. For some reason, I had a strong feeling that this mushroom would help me out with my problems at the time. Foolishly, I didn't even try microdosing or starting small beforehand, thinking that my experiences with acid and one experience with 9 grams of amanitas gave me full right to rush straight into an amanita trip at 20 grams. This mistake later proved to be nearly fatal. It's true what one person said: you must respect amanita, or it will make you respect it. I had 60 grams of mushrooms. Immediately, I split them into 3 20-gram portions, planning on having 3 trips. The first 2 trips were nothing out of the ordinary. I was mostly in control of my body and thought process. I had slight dissociation and sedation, no visuals, and had a great time meditating. However, with my 3rd trip, everything was different. Before describing it, I'd like to point out 2 more mistakes that I made. Number 1, seeing that Amanita had no tolerance build-up whatsoever, at least for me, I thought it was a good idea to trip throughout the week. So, I had my first trip on Tuesday, second one on Wednesday, and the hellish 3rd one on Friday. Number 2, I was living with my parents at the time. Seeing that the first 2 trips were mostly controllable, I thought that nothing bad could happen, and I was sorely mistaken. At around 6 o'clock, I came home from the gym. Mum was taking a nap and Dad usually returned home from work late at night. So in my mind, it was the perfect time to eat my last portion of mushrooms. At 6:40, I started experiencing familiar feelings from the trips before. Euphoria, slight disorientation, and sedation. However, this time, something was different. In addition to those effects, I began to experience extreme arousal. The feeling wasn't very enjoyable though. I was so aroused that it actually made me dizzy, and I decided to deal with it so that it doesn't ruin the trip. I found some porn and was utterly hypnotized by it. The computer screen was sucking me into it, almost to the point where I felt like I was inside the film. When I was done, I was surprised to find out that it took me only 20 minutes, because for me it felt at least like an hour. My hands started shaking and I tried to calm myself down. Thoughts like, "Oh, this was a mistake," started running through my head. 7 o'clock, right after the deed was done, it felt as though my room's floor is a giant magnet. I lay down, putting my head on my gym bag. I prepared a playlist with some Celtic folk music beforehand, but for some reason decided to put another song on repeat as I fell asleep on the floor. 7:46, after 46 minutes of dreamless sleep, I woke up, still on the floor. Dissociation was much stronger than in previous trips. When I stood up and tried to walk around my room, it was as though my every limb had a mind of its own. Each body part was moving independently, and with each second I lost control over my body more and more. I couldn't feel my toes, which made me panic. I started checking if my toes were still there every few seconds. Aside from bodily dissociation, I also experienced severe mental dissociation. Just like with my limbs, every thought in my head was in disarray, and they all suddenly became louder. Thoughts started to fight with each other, each one trying to outscream the others. For some reason, that didn't scare me. I felt like I was rapidly going insane though, and at the moment this thought made me laugh out loud. The song that was still playing on repeat now had an almost apocalyptic feel to it. Like everything around was crumbling down, and the world would soon perish into nothingness. This made me laugh even harder. 7:53, one of the thoughts had finally won over. It was now repeating over and over in my head. "There's so much dirt inside you, there's so much dirt inside you." So with this in my mind, I went to the bathroom, but without any success. However, I remained there for a solid 10 minutes, just watching the toilet flush and the water run away. I felt my heart pound loudly, surely trying to break out and tear my chest apart. Adding to the "there's so much dirt inside you" thought loop, images started appearing in my imagination. I was looking at the world through the eyes of my other woman self, degraded, humiliated, sexually assaulted, and abused over and over. The scenes made me simultaneously feel disgust and this trippy, dizzy arousal that I experienced in the beginning. At around 8:05, I finally returned to my room. The world was spinning around me, making me feel nauseous. Everything around me looked like it was about to collapse, and the walls seemed to bend and stretch in such a strange way that it seemed like my surroundings could snap into pieces any time. I don't remember blacking out or falling asleep, but somewhere between 8:05 and 8:50, I was whisked out of my body. From that moment on, only an angry berserk husk remained on Earth, while my mind and soul were trapped in my personal hell. First, I'll write about what happened down here on Earth, from the words of my mother. At around 8:50, she heard screaming from my room. A scream so angry and loud that our neighbours had probably heard it. She knocked on my door but heard no response. Then other sounds started to come out of my room. I was hissing, banging against walls and furniture, crying, grunting. Not being able to take it anymore, she broke into my room. Upon seeing me, she didn't know what to do. This wasn't her son, whoever that was. It was an angry, confused animal with a bruised lip and chin. She tried to calm me down and sat me against the wall, a task which proved quite difficult to accomplish given the fact I kept thrashing around. After countless attempts, she finally managed to lead me out into the living room, where she sat me on the couch. Mum tried giving me water, and apparently I was trying to drink it, but my teeth were closed shut. Water was spilling all over my t-shirt, but I still refused to open my mouth. At that point, I calmed down a little and stopped thrashing around, but this image was even more terrifying for her. I was sitting there, staring blankly into nothingness, my arms completely limp, drool dripping off my chin. She called Dad, telling him to come home as soon as possible, explaining the situation to him. Now, my dad knew that I had purchased amanitas, so he immediately put two and two together, and soon came home. Not knowing what to do with me, and seeing that my condition wasn't improving, they called an ambulance. Upon arriving, paramedics quickly roughly tackled me down, which immediately triggered a fighting response. I once again started thrashing, screaming, trying to hit them with my fists and legs. It took two paramedics and my father to hold me down, and they injected me with haloperidol, tying me down, driving me off to the ER. At 11:46, I was admitted to the hospital. According to the staff, I was screaming at the top of my lungs, trying to fight them the whole time. I finally fully returned to my body at around 1 AM, finding myself with an uncomfortable urethral catheter, my hands and legs also being tied to the hospital bed, as well as being extremely exhausted and unsure if the hospital was real or just another vision. Well, this was what happened on Earth according to people who witnessed it. But where was my mind? At first, after being torn from my body, I was dragged through a series of uncomfortable visions. Each one of my mistakes, regrets, fears, dirty fantasies, anxieties, they all rushed before my eyes at the speed of light. "This is it," a voice said. "You're not coming back." And then, hell broke loose. I always believed that even if there were heaven or hell after death, they would be personally tailored for each soul. And I ended up in mine. Countless floating demonic heads surrounded me, jeering at me, taunting me. I ran through them, hitting them with my fists, kicking and screaming, shouting, "Let me out! Let me out now!" I fought back with all my might, but it was futile. I was too weak. Whenever one of the heads managed to grab me in its jaws, I was shown a different story of a different person. I can't really remember them in details, but each one was a story of constant fear, despair, and ultimately, demise. At the end of each one, a voice said, "This is you. This is you." And I was immediately spat out, thrown back into the sea of demonic heads. After what seemed like an eternity of fighting, I started to see a gap between the heads. Gathering all of my strength, I rushed towards it, kicking and screaming, desperate to reach my only chance of freedom. The gap was getting closer and closer, and upon closer look I saw that it's actually a crack in materium. One chance, I thought, as I jumped into it. I could feel it close behind me. I found myself floating in a dark, cold void. "Now you get to experience every horrible thing you did before your body gave up on itself," a man's voice told me, and I saw a silhouette of light in the distance. This phrase doesn't make any sense now, but back then, it made me feel this deep, cold terror. I felt as though I was dead, never to come back, and this entity was judging me for all of my sins. Looking at the silhouette gave me feelings of deep, primordial fear, but I couldn't look away or do anything else. This was likely during the time when my body was sitting on a couch in the living room with a blank stare. Remember, you did that because you were a coward. The silhouette started getting closer. You were never worthy of living anyway. It got even closer. "Oh, do something!" My mind screamed at itself, but I couldn't move. "Do something!" Standing right in front of me, the silhouette clicked its fingers. I was immediately transported into a tiny room with walls of rusty metal.
Invisible force dragged me around, hitting my body against the walls, ceiling, floor, until I just gave up and lay limp. Hands, bruised, covered in warts, appeared out of thin air. They started to touch me and tug at my limbs. Then they started tearing. Each time they tore off my limbs, I screamed in pure agony. They sewn them back and then tore them off again, torturing me. "This will never end," I screamed. At that point, I believed that I was already dead and was to remain in there forever. I was thrown from one room to another, and in each room I was tortured in a different way. They were no longer sewing my body parts back, but they were just disassembling my body until nothing remained of me but the eyes, floating in the void. And so I, consisting of nothing but my eyes, began floating in the void aimlessly, searching for something. In the distance, I saw yet another silhouette standing on its hands and knees. Immediately, I recognized it as my own body. I tried to float into it, but something stopped me. A giant blade appeared in the void and was shoved into its groin, which was most likely a catheter insertion in the hospital. I felt immediate pain and tried to scream, but I had no mouth. Resisting the force pushing me away from my body, I attempted to float into it, but each time, through more and more agonizing pain, I was getting closer, and once I reached its face, the blade entered through its forehead, severing it completely. I floated into the wound and found myself inside the silhouette. I couldn't move my hands and feet, likely due to being tied to the hospital bed by the staff. Gathering all of my strength, I opened my eyes and found myself in a hospital room. There was no one else here. It didn't actually feel real, and I was sure that this was just another layer of my personal hell. Adding up to it was the realization that I'm tied to the bed, so I was convinced that any moment entities would come back and start torturing me again. I turned my head, looked out the window, and saw that everything outside was on fire. I closed my eyes, subjecting myself to fate, and finally fell asleep. When I woke up again, 3 doctors were in the room. One of them gave me another injection and started asking questions. What substance did I take? What did I experience? My mind was still hazy, but surprisingly, I was able to say that I ate some fly agaric, at which he scoffed. I didn't tell him about my experience, simply answering that I didn't want to talk about it. For the next 24 hours, I was slowly and painfully returning back to reality. I was discharged a day later. I didn't fully recover until a week had passed. I'm not planning another trip on Amanitas anytime soon. I feel deep regret for putting my parents through that, and sometimes in my nightmares, I briefly return to this hell of mine. As I said in the beginning, don't be foolish. Respect Amanita, or it will make you respect it.
Like no known suffering. A diamond hydronate report by K. Pars, posted to earbud.org, August 19th, 2006. It was early December of 2002. Just a month before, I had discovered the joys of marijuana and decided I needed to expand. I wanted to hallucinate. I thought of the process as mystical and mind-expanding. After 2 weeks of zealous research, I discovered Dramamine. I'd heard many negative trip reports up to this point, but my stubborn teenage sense of adventure had truly taken over. So it was simple. One day after school, I went to my local shop and bought a box of 12 Dramamine tablets and went home. I read the box and noted the "do not exceed this dosage" warning. I will always remember reading this and blowing it off. I was wrong, and it cost me dearly. So I got home around 3 o'clock. At this point I was bubbling with excitement and anxiety. I was going to see the dark side of the moon, a concept introduced to me only weeks earlier. I giddily took out the white pills. This was it. There was no turning back now. I filled my mouth with water and took the pills 3 at a time. The taste was absolutely revolting. It was like a very bland piece of concrete, and I even gagged a few times. But in the course of a minute, I took the 12 50mg dimenhydrinate pills at a dose of 600 milligrams. All I expected was some annoying drowsiness, and then fantastic hallucinations like I never imagined. I sat at my computer, typing away to people on message boards about how anxious I was feeling. After around 20 minutes, I felt the first effects. One was the perception of the weight of my body. When I stood up, I felt as if I had a 75-pound backpack on. I walked to the bathroom, just sat on the toilet, for lack of anything else to do. As I looked down at the floor, I started to notice that I was hallucinating. It was nothing like I'd expected, though. As I stared at the floor, the centre of my vision seemed to be fluctuating. Some light black waterish pattern seemed to be compacting and releasing, and compacting and releasing again. I stared at this intently. I felt little emotion as I looked at it. It was intriguing to see, and all I could do was watch and stay silent. After about 5 minutes, I noticed I was getting incredibly tired. The feeling was absolutely revolting me. I felt as if I hadn't slept in 2 or 3 days. I was fatigued beyond any previous experience. Also, my body continued to get heavier. When I tried to walk, it was noticeably more difficult. I walked into my room and sat on my bed, and remained on my bed for about 30 minutes just looking at the visuals. They were fascinating, I must say. Along with the black water, a sort of a static field had formed. I went on my computer, but at this point I was totally blown. Walking was extremely tiring, and I felt as if I could fall asleep any minute. I was so disoriented, it really made me severely anxious. I felt the worst I had ever felt in my life. I kept on getting this urge to stretch my muscles. They felt powerless, especially my lower back, and it was extremely uncomfortable all over. I also had to pee every 5 minutes, but couldn't. And I was getting a bit bizarre. I started to walk around upstairs looking for somewhere to go, but I just could not. It was so very frustrating. I felt like I had to find some place to feel better, but that place was nowhere. After about an hour and 30 into my experience, I went downstairs and sat on the couch to try to distract myself and watch TV. As I limped downstairs and sat down, which did not relieve me in the least, and turned on the TV, I realised that I was extremely sensitive to sound. I tried to talk and discovered that I had developed a very serious case of severe dry mouth. I could only mumble barely understandable words one at a time. As the TV flickered on, I was jolted down into my seat, and it scared the shit out of me. It was so fucking loud, and turning it down just seemed to emphasise that wretched sound that was coming out. I was scared. My thought process was severely compromised, and all I thought of was regret. When would this hell end? I thought this would be enjoyable, cheap, and fun. Now, about 2 hours in, the most memorable moment of my trip begins. Feeling like I'm going to go mad, I tried to get up and go upstairs to do anything. I didn't care. Then suddenly I saw the single most fantastic hallucination. On top of the TV, in the 2x3 space between it and the power box, I saw dozens upon dozens of flies flying up and down. I blinked, and they were still there. It was absolutely stunning. I watched these black dots fly randomly, and they seemed to really exist. I wasn't even thinking about their validity, but it seemed so real. One might fly onto a wire between the TV and power box and stay there for a moment, and then quickly fly away. The wire might physically move, and I approached the TV, but after a minute of apprehension, put my arm in the swarming group of flies. Most flew, as usual, but to my utter amazement, many seemed to land on my arm, maybe hop a few steps, and fly back. And I could actually feel them too. Not sharply, but I felt the dull sensations and just stood there for 15 minutes in shock. I was nervous about the flies, but I knew that they weren't real. I wasn't concerning to thinking of the reality of them. So I went upstairs like I'd previously planned to do, well, who knows what. I still even had to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes, and at this point I was getting paranoid that someone would suspect me of being on a drug of some type. I checked out my window nearly constantly, under fear I would be caught. I was as paranoid as a schizophrenic. Finally, 2 hours and 30 minutes into the hell, I decided I would go to sleep. I was so fucking tired. The hallucinations mostly were unimpressive when physically I felt so terrible. My muscle stretching continued and was worse than irritating. It was actually driving me crazy. I tossed and turned. Looking at the walls, I was still having the static and black water compaction effects going on. I remember when I was shutting down my computer, I could swear that the on-screen mouse was actually smoking some clear vapor. Somewhere along the line, I started looking at my arm, and I had some pretty horrifying visuals. When staring at it, parts of my arm would slowly turn terribly dirty and crimson red. I couldn't tell if it was real or not. Also, I saw little individual hairs growing out of my skin. They grew quickly and bent every which way like the legs of some dying insect. I tried to ignore it. But then, I started hearing voices. They weren't anything too specific, but every 30 seconds I would hear my dad yell my name, wake up and feel terribly frightened. Eventually I heard people having conversations. I don't remember anything specific, but I remember them having an especially negative effect on me. So, 3 hours in, I fell asleep, utterly terrified and disappointed. I woke up the next day, very depressed and anxious. This wore off within a week, and I decided to get on with my life. I promised myself never to screw with Dramamine again. But unfortunately, I broke that promise an additional 5 times. This was deeply regretted each time. I chose to come back those times because I was lulled by the hallucinations. The visuals just affected me, I guess. They made me want to see them for the sheer rarity of their appearance on a normal basis. Well, the last time, in early January, I did Dramamine and I took 24, felt like shit, and was caught by my parents and basically screwed. About a month later, in a panic attack, I displayed symptoms of hallucinogen persisting perceptual disorder, HPPD, and I can tell you that these have not gone away. So basically, my life right now is like this. In every single second of my consciousness, I have low-dose Dramamine-like visuals. But it doesn't stop there. My anxiety is increased, along with pseudo-paranoia, and I always have to think about the one day I started, and thank that for the errors in my body now. Nucleonistridac, a 6-gram heroic dose of golden teachers, a trip report from the Vivek Discord. I first gave magic mushrooms a go in March of 2021, when I bought 5 grams of golden teacher mushrooms, doing a gram of them for my first time. The gram dose felt somewhat like being stoned, and while interesting in its own right, I decided to go deeper and see what I'd encounter, doing 2 grams for my next trip, which led to a very strange and yet fascinating day at the local mall. After experimenting with about 2 grams for a couple months and reading about heroic dose experiences, I decided I was ready to go to that level, a big mistake looking back now. In late May of that same year, I consumed 6 grams after work while at my house. It was hard to get them down, but I managed to accomplish what felt like a challenge at the time, and about 20 minutes into the trip, right when effects were taking hold, I decided it would be a good time to go for a walk. So, I left my house, headed toward a field I knew of that sat by a picturesque pond, and when I arrived at the pond, things were already starting to get rather intense. The sky seemed especially bright, and the grass swayed unnaturally in the wind. The sound of passing cars seemed enhanced in a strange and alien manner, and it felt like I could hear everything that was going on all at once, even faint noises in the background such as a dog barking. This cacophony of sound unnerved me, and I eventually decided to walk some more, ending up at a local grocery store in the area. As I approached the store, the parking lot flickered, and the pavement was a sea of movement and morphing, and upon entering the building, I found that the terrible wall of sound in there was worse than it had been outside. I did the only thing I could think of doing at the time, and made my way for the men's room at the back of the building, assuming that I would find some form of sanctuary within it. When I entered the men's room, the lights were turned off. Sparks seemed to fly in the corners of my eyes, and the walls vibrated with energy. Turning the light on, I made my way into the handicap stall and sat down, and here my experience reached its peak intensity. The toilet I was sitting on felt like it was only half a foot tall, too small to hold me. And yet when I looked at the floor, it felt as if I was miles up in the sky. The square floor tiles took on the appearance of farmland or rice paddies, as if you were seeing them from inside of a plane, and I quickly averted my gaze from the ground just beneath me, focusing on the wall instead. At this point, my anxiety was at an all-time high, and it felt like I was losing my sanity as the room took on a strange and artificial appearance, as if I was inside of a video game. The floor began to shift colours, and the room shook as if an earthquake had struck the building. As I watched, the entire environment had become a strange funhouse reality that disturbed me greatly, and my vision began to glitch. At least, that's the best way I could describe it. One moment I was in this morphing and ever-changing public bathroom, and then for a brief second I was somewhere else. Another reality. Another planet within this one. Across a great plain, I witnessed a very large behemoth looking directly at me from behind a hillside, with fierce eyes. Within my brain, a strange word was spoken with a mechanical voice that resembled nothing I had ever heard before. Nucleonistridac. I believed this to be the name of the eldritch being that I gazed back upon. And just like that, I was returned to the bathroom. I began pacing the stall anxiously, concerned I would never be sober again and would be stuck like this forever. They would eventually find me in here going mad in the stall, and I would be committed to a mental hospital for the rest of my existence. I was convinced that this was the end for me in the worst way possible. My vision continued to glitch, and I would start to see planets. Some recognisable, such as Jupiter, others fully alien, their place in the galaxy unknown. I checked my phone and saw that it was 6:57 PM. Almost 2 hours had gone by since I consumed the 6-gram dose, and I still had 3 or 4 hours of this to go. I called up my best friend to tell him what was happening, and hopefully to get a ride from him home once the effects had subsided, and thankfully he actually picked up. I told him I was tripping very hard and struggling to maintain a sense of reality, and he reached with both fear and awe at what I had put myself through. As I spoke to him, the number 657 kept flashing through my brain in a thought loop that would last me the next hour and a half. The bathroom felt like it was floating in empty space, and I wondered if I opened the door, would I find the store or just a black void of sorts? I was fortunate that in my entire time within the bathroom, only one person actually walked in to use it. There was no way I could have interacted with anyone in person during this experience, and when talking to my best friend, my words were slurred and sometimes hard to get out. It was like trying to talk after having just learned a language, like some important part of my brain had been put into low power mode. Eventually, around 7:30 PM, the effects had lessened enough that I felt safe in leaving the bathroom. I wandered the store for a while, venturing down aisles with an adventurous spirit. It felt like being in a museum of basic modern American life, and I gazed upon each item with a curiosity unmatched. By about 9 PM, the trip had subsided to feeling like I was buzzed on alcohol or somewhat stoned, and my buddy picked me up from the building and took me back to my house. On the way back, I explained everything that had just happened to him, and told him that I felt lucky to be alive at this point. I'd felt so convinced that I would never recover from this trip, and just knowing it was coming to a close felt like the biggest relief I had experienced and would ever get to experience. When I did arrive home, I went straight to bed after having dinner, I was worn out by the trip, like I'd just gone through the most intense exercise of my life. I've never attempted a heroic dose since this day, and I'm not sure that I really need to. Going beyond just how scared I was during my time in the bathroom, it felt to me like these were one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments that you're not supposed to redo. Since this day, I've kept my shrooms dosages rather conservative, doing only 1.5 to 2 grams of Golden Teacher. I've never tried 3 grams of it, specifically due to my fear of a possible repeat of what happened at 6, although in all likelihood, 3 grams would be less intense. How much less intense this would actually be though, is anyone's guess. The closest I've actually come to this trip since the day it happened was when I did Liberty Caps for the first time, at a dosage of 1.5 grams. And even that was still more manageable than my heroic dose of Golden Teachers, since I was able to walk around outside while in the Liberty Caps. I could not have remained outside during my Golden Teacher heroic dose, and I am glad that in spite of my altered state, I still had the sense to find somewhere to hide when I knew the peak was about to make its impact. My advice for anyone attempting a heroic dose for the first time would be to have a trip sitter present, and to please stay inside until the peak. No matter how you feel on the come up, assume nothing until 2 hours into your trip, because these mushrooms can hit you with a sneak attack if you aren't careful, and believe that you can handle anything. If I was to try a heroic dose again, I would definitely want to be in a secure location such as my home, somewhere that I cannot get myself into any deep shit. Regardless of the fear-inducing nature of the heroic dose, I still feel privileged to have experienced this strange afternoon, one that still feels like yesterday, even after 3 years. There is little out there that can compare to both the awe and the fear psychedelics can bestow upon us, and the new outlooks we can develop as a result in regards to life, the universe, and ourselves. Talking Pillows, a Brugmansia trip report by Psychonaut420, posted to earbud.org May 5th, 2006. After previous experiences with similar anticholinogenic deliriants like Benadryl, Dramamine and DXM combined with Dramamine, I stupidly dove headfirst into an irresponsible, impulsive and almost fatal experience with the ancient and long-respected delirium, Brugmansia, or Tree Datura. In late 2003 I moved to Fort Lauderdale from NJ for about a year. When I first moved into the apartment, I met someone who knew of several belladonna trees growing around the nearby neighbourhoods. Several times when we were bored, we used to take long hikes all over the area trying to find this plant, never with any success. It wasn't uncommon for us to walk 3 hours or longer during our hikes. After about a month of this, we gave up, assuming that the trees were dug up and no longer around, even though there is a major road in the area called Datura Street. Later on that year I met S, and randomly asked upon meeting her if she had seen or knew where there was Datura growing in the area. S grew up in the area and was overall familiar with the neighbourhoods. Without skipping a beat, S replied with an exact location of an angel trumpet tree growing in front of a small church. Ecstatic, I told her to take a walk with me and show me where this plant was, remembering how much time me and my other friend wasted walking around Fort Lauderdale aimlessly trying to find this strangely compelling plant. I was broke, bored, and tired of sitting in my stifling apartment with no air or electricity. So me, S, and Loser, who was currently staying at my apartment, took a hike to find this elusive tree. Times were rough then, and I was about to be evicted from my apartment, thanks to a former roommate, best friend, or dickhead, who stole a shitload of rent money from me to support his own heroin addiction, and Loser, who I let stay with me, had no job. Ultimately, I was not in a good state of mind, and had no business taking an extremely powerful and potentially deadly delirium plant. I really was dangerously impulsive, and I could have easily killed myself that night. The three of us finally approached the church, and sure enough, there was this massive tree standing strong, embracing the church, clutching it even, almost like it had been guarding the church for years, despite its age-old association with the devil. For years I've been into psychedelics, and I usually don't approach an opportunity like this so irresponsibly, but being as depressed as I was, but yet almost mesmerised and overjoyed to find this plant growing only a couple of blocks away from my apartment, I ran up to the tree and filled a couple of shopping bags with plant material. I madly shoved handfuls of leaves and flowers into my mouth, munching on the bitter hallucinogenic salad, knowing that I could possibly die that night. I don't know what I was thinking, because honestly I knew in the back of my head that this was going to be just like all of those awful experiences with Dramamine and Benadryl, but some weird unconscious drive to self-destruction just came into play during the moment. Somehow seeing the actual plant right in front of me with its alluring radiance, peculiar smell, and an aura of forbidden knowledge gave me a feeling like it would be different in some way. It was as though I was temporarily blinded of my familiarity with the reports online about natural tropane alkaloids, as they were usually described to be more out of control, sinister and unnerving than experiences written about the over-the-counter drugs like Dramamine that mimic some of the familiar effects produced by belladonna and datura. It was late at night, and after we filled up a few shopping bags with flowers and leaves, we power-walked back to the apartment complex. Broward County pigs tend to stop and search people randomly for no reason at night time, so they can put them in jail and get money for arresting someone. We made it a point to get back as soon as possible. I did not want to be caught with bags full of suspicious leaves, and have to spend a night in a prison tripping on datura. Familiar with how tropane alkaloids act on the body, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it back standing upright. Nothing too amazing happened on the walk home though. I don't remember this, but S told me that when we got close to the apartment, Loser pointed at a cactus and yelled, "Oh look, it's San Pedro cactus." And as a reflex, I reached out and grabbed the cactus, then let go realising my hand was full of cactus needles, and it wasn't San Pedro at all. I know towards the end of the journey back home I started becoming really wobbly and had trouble walking straight. The body high was very similar to being drunk, with no physical discomfort just yet. I remember during this period, the buzz was actually quite pleasant. After a while, the hot, stale summer night air started feeling like fluid sliding over me as I walked. Instead of going into my apartment, me, S, and Loser went to the pool area and swam for a while. It was around this time I had noticed I was starting to feel the effects getting ready to come on strong. My dizziness started feeling like it was about to lift off. The adrenaline and anxiety seemed to be gradually increasing as my heart pumped the now intoxicating blood through my veins. I started feeling less and less comfortable and safe to being outside and in the pool. It was about an hour after that I ate the plants by then. At that time, I suggested to Loser to come inside the apartment. He had eaten a fair amount also, so I advised him to head inside and lay down, because I knew it was going to hit both of us very soon. Once again, I clarify the apartment had no air conditioning or electricity anymore because of my former roommate Dickhead taking all that money from me. So the inside of the apartment was truly brutal. The air was hot, stagnant, and 2 of the 3 couches were leather, so when you lay down on them it sticks to your skin. Needless to say, the surroundings were very uncomfortable, not to mention we had no lights except for a few candles. Not a suitable setting for tripping. I did not want to be caught outside acting stupid in front of any one of my neighbours, or have Loser be arrested or tied up, talking to the hallucinations that may manifest to him in the parking lot. Sometime between the time I decided to walk from the pool to the apartment, I found myself laying flat on the ground halfway outside, with only my head and arms in the apartment, talking to Dickhead's aunt from NJ. It was at this point that the femme fatale has succeeded in knocking me on my ass, straight into an imaginary realm, where nothing is what it seems. Apparently I got up the steps when all of a sudden the force of the vertigo hit me like a shot of heroin, disabling me and making me think I was in NJ. I'm pretty sure 1 or 2 of my other friends came over at that time. To this day I haven't fully figured out who was there and who wasn't. I blacked out several times during the peak, and my memory from this point is very choppy. Off and on, all night long, I found myself on the floor or leaning over the back of the daybed in the front room with everyone, either smoking a non-existent cigarette or having slurred, senseless conversations with friends back in Jersey on my cell phone, only to realise that I wasn't holding anything at all. This was when the effects of the Brugmansia had taken full force on my body. Despite my endless conversations with imaginary people, I had lost control of my tongue, so when I spoke it was like I had overdosed on that anti-anxiety medication, Haldol. Although it was nowhere near as bad as a Haldol overdose, it was still almost impossible to communicate with the real world, and I felt like I had Down syndrome. At points I had to force myself up against the nauseating gravity that had my body held in a lying position to take a trip to the bathroom. This was always annoying because I had to pee, what seemed like every other minute to be honest. This was very physically challenging for a reality-challenged individual. Every time I had to get up, I could feel the weight of gravity trying to push me back in place. It was a fight against vertigo, and the effects of the plant were kicking my ass. These feelings of extreme vertigo always reminded me of times when I was a kid, when I would try to stick my head or arms out against the force of gravity when I rode the Gravitron on the boardwalk. When I got up on my feet, I would wobble around for the first few steps until I could finally grab onto a wall or something and shuffle my way to the bathroom. Once I got into the bathroom, immediately I noticed the repulsive stench of the dark room. The humidity from the shower area mixed with the heat and the foul moisture evaporating from the toilet area, and overall feeling of nastiness, cottonmouth and the lack of control of my body made these walks very, very unpleasant. I often had to crouch over the toilet because for some reason it was like my prostate was swollen or something, and it was a real effort just to relieve myself, despite how badly I had to go. Every time I would leave the main room to go to the bathroom, I would have some of the most confusing, full-blown auditory and visual hallucinations. At times, I wasn't aware that these were hallucinations, unless it was too bizarre to be possible. But even then, I sometimes fell for it, thinking that it was real. The only way to distinguish what's real and what isn't is to touch it. If my hand goes through it, or it moves back as I reach for it, then it's not real. I noticed that sometimes these hallucinations actually cover real things so that I can't see them. Like one time, I tried to reach for the doorknob to get out of a room, and I'd reach for a fake one underneath the real one that would be covered by a dark spot. This started a very annoying cycle of events that took me until the middle of the following day to get out of. One of the times I had to go to the bathroom, I remember I had to relight one of the candles. Immediately after I relit the candle, I slide back down to the floor next to the toilet from the sickening and nauseating force of gravity. While I struggled to relieve myself, wobbling back and forth, kneeling, pants down next to the toilet, Loser and S came in and started talking to me. This seemed really weird, considering I was half naked and in the process of peeing, but whatever they were saying to me seemed real and coherent enough that I continued talking to them for about 15 minutes. This is a perfect example of an eerily familiar dream logic that often supported my psychotic behaviour at the time. As I started to stand upright and pull my pants up, a black cat ran from the hallway into the bathroom. It jumped over my feet and into the shower. I remember telling them what I just saw, and both of them started laughing at me and told me I was crazy and just hallucinating. Turns out, both of them were hallucinations. After the fake S and loser left the room, I remember seeing a shadowy glass of water by the sink. Somehow, I thought that I might have left it in the bathroom earlier to relieve my cottonmouth at the time. I grabbed the glass of water, was about to drink it, but as soon as the water hit my tongue, I realised that I had grabbed a plastic bottle of isopropyl alcohol. My mouth was on fire, and I put my mouth to the sink and tried to flush the toxic, fiery taste out of my mouth. I stumbled back into the other room, collapsed onto the leather couch into S's lap, and snuggled into her body, mumbling absolute nonsense, and blacked out for the rest of the night. I woke up still tripping, and stumbled to the bedroom, seeing Dickhead snoring loudly in my bed. It was morning and everything was bright, and took on a dirty yellowish pea colour. My pupils were still completely dilated, and the light hurt my eyes. The large 290-pound guy who was sleeping on my bed seemed too real to be a hallucination. I even went and leaned over the bed, right by his face to see if he was real. I could feel his breath blowing in my face as he snored very, very loudly. Something about the way his chest moved in and out as he breathed seemed like it faded into the next position, almost like a movement trail from acid. It was almost opaque, with a fluid-like pattern moving over his body like how the walls had looked the night before made this seem a little suspicious. I walked around the bed to check again. Dickhead no longer stayed at my apartment, and even though we were not really speaking at the time, it wasn't uncommon for him to hang out at my apartment when other people were around, since we did share some of the same group of friends. Something told me it still didn't make any sense that he would be sleeping in my bed though. I wasn't even sure that I'd remembered seeing him there at all that night. I left the room still baffled and confused, yet again passing out and blacking out for an hour or so. Loser had left, supposedly to go to the library and look for jobs, and S walked out of the bedroom and came into the kitchen to get a drink of water, then passed out in the front room by me on one of the couches. At one point I asked her why Dickhead was sleeping in my bed and what he was even doing in my apartment. S told me he wasn't at the apartment at any time during the night, and she was the one sleeping in my bed. S is 16, medium height, skinny, and does not resemble Dickhead in any way, shape, or form. After Loser left, S decided to go to the library as well. She was very concerned for me and asked me if I would be okay to be alone in the apartment. At some point in that morning after Loser left, she told me that for about 6 minutes, I was walking in circles in the bedroom with my hands clenched in my hair, yelling repeatedly, "Make it stop! Make it stop! Make it stop!" I told her I'd be okay, and it would probably be best for me to be by myself, while I ride out the tail end of this nasty trip. I was alone in the house, and I told myself that from this point on, if I see or talk to anyone, it couldn't possibly be real. So it was obviously a hallucination. I even chain-locked the front door to further prove this theory. Well, the hallucinations continued to proceed through the morning, and like always, despite my attempts to stay in reality, the dream logic always made holes in my lucidity throughout the trip. For the rest of that morning, I found myself falling constantly into a frustrating and annoying thought loop. Typically, almost every 15 to 20 minutes, I would hear the door slam open and hear Loser yell from the other room, Matt, are you home? I'm back. I would come into the front room and see him standing in front of the door. As I continued talking to him, his voice would fade out until only his lips would be moving, with no sound coming out. Then, gradually, he would slowly fade into the background and dissipate. At this point, I started becoming coherent enough that this repetitive illusion started becoming more and more disturbing and annoying. I could speak clearly now without my tongue getting in the way, but I was not completely coherent. My sentences were often choppy. I stuttered a lot when I spoke. Yet another clockwise disturbance that came about every 10 to 15 minutes was that I would be holding the cell phone talking to a friend in NJ while I laid on my bed, and every time I noticed I had no cell phone in my hand, but yet I would still hear my friend's gargled voice continuing to talk. For some reason, again the dream logic, I would always respond back and tell her, "I'm sorry, but you're not real, and I do have to go now. Goodbye." Then the voice would stop. After that, I would think I was talking to S, who would be sitting next to me on the bed, and she would vaporize as soon as I looked over at her or touched her. These 3 hallucinations continued for a few hours until the real S came back. Other common hallucinations consisted of bugs crawling single-lined on the walls, weird sounds echoing from the other room, or gargled alien conversations directly coming from my head. Occasionally I would think I was somewhere in New Jersey, talking to someone when I had my eyes closed, or I would see one of my friends standing in the corner of the room silently mouthing words and vaporizing after only a few seconds. The most bizarre, and probably one of the last major hallucinations that occurred that morning, was also in my bedroom on the bed opposite of me. Sitting on the bed, I had a Dawn of the Dead pillow and a Freddy Krueger pillow. Well, for some reason at some point I had a whole conversation with these pillows. S's voice came out of the Dawn of the Dead pillow, and Loser's voice came out of the Freddy Krueger one. I talked back and forth with them for a minute or so, until I realised I was talking to a bunch of pillows and that no one was actually there. I asked these pillow entities if they were archons from different dimensions, and if they could talk to me about themselves. As soon as I asked them those questions, they assumed their normal inanimate position, stopping talking to me. This is crazy. "I'm actually talking to a bunch of pillows," I politely said. "You aren't responding, so to be honest, I'm sorry, but I can't talk to you anymore. This isn't a one-way conversation. Goodbye. After this, the hallucinations started to fade, and I eventually fell into a weird, easily disturbed twilight sleep. I did not feel normal for the rest of the day. My pupils remained dilated for a couple of days afterwards. I stayed inside during the daytime because any time I tried to open the door to go outside, all I would see is white and was basically blinded by the sun. Overall, I don't think I will ever repeat this experience. I went back and filled my refrigerator full of leaves and pink trumpets a few days later and tripped again on a much lower dose. The trip was nowhere near as visual as the first, and much more uncomfortable, despite no hallucinations. This time, the physical effects dominated the trip, and the entire time I felt like I was going to die. Personally, I consider an experience of Datura as postgraduate work for psychonauts, as Jim DeCorn once wrote. I can't say I regret this experience by any means because of the profound and sometimes amazing things this plant has shown me, but I doubt I will ever do it again. Experiencing the effects of this plant is no joke whatsoever, and as Carlos Castaneda once wrote, to tame the devil's weed into an ally is one of the most difficult tasks I know. That terrified, naked man in the corner is me. A Datura trip report by Craig, posted to EARBUDS.org, August 28, 2006. I'll start with a little background. This is a detailed report of a trip that spans the course of 3 days. I'm not 100% sure on all the details of the trip, as I can't truly recall everything. Clues I found in my house after the trip helped though, and chronologically, this story is quite accurate. Background. A friend and I have been serious into drugs for years now. We'll call him Chris. Between the two of us, we've tried nearly every drug that could even be slightly considered recreational, drugs many of you have never likely even heard of. Then came the inevitability. Deliriants. The day finally came where there were just no drugs left to try. After reading extensively, we turned to deliriants. It was all that was left to try now. We meticulously grew and picked Datura plants that we had grown and cultivated over an indeterminate stretch of time. The day finally came when the plant was ready to be ingested. We separated a significant portion of seeds, 600 apiece. Looking back, the dose was absolutely ridiculous, and we are very, very lucky to be alive. I should actually be a dead man right now. The mentality behind the dose was something along the lines of, well, we're too experienced not to do this much, and our bodies are too used to drugs, etc. Essentially, we were too tough for Datura, and thus took a very stupid dose and a very stupid risk. The trip. Day 1. T+0 to T+1 hours. Jen, a friend of mine, came over to sit with us. We ingested 600 seeds, each as quickly as possible, washing them down with a glass of milk. We then locked all the doors and windows to my house as to prevent any drug-induced rampages, police run-ins, or worse. Chris and I plopped down in front of my new big screen and began watching a movie. About an hour into it, I started to feel the effects. The dry mouth came on, as in other trip reports, but I had no idea it would be this strong. My legs felt like rubber and my body was completely out of whack. I looked over to Chris to tell him it was kicking in, and I found even this simple task disorienting. He confirmed the same experience thus far. In what was the stupidest move of the century, Jen decided she was bored and that she would take 150 seeds. Now, she's had her experiences with drugs before, but she was our sitter in this moment. T+3 hours. As time passed, it seemed to stretch on. Much like a DXM trip, I lost all reference of time. The only indicator was a digital clock, which would have been impossible to read if it weren't for the large readout. The movie had since finished and the television was airing some show about cops. I honestly couldn't tell you what it was I was watching, but all the lights and colours melded into this visual supernova that I just couldn't stop staring at. Chris grunted strangely, and I looked over to see him sliding off the couch. I became frightened because at that very moment, the room had vanished. We were stranded on a couch in a burning hallway. I grabbed Chris and pulled him back onto the couch so that he wouldn't get burned. He looked at me with his massive pupils and spoke an unrecognisable string of words. Time slowed as he spoke. His voice echoed in slow motion, and his pupils expanded beyond his eyes, spiralling toward me. I was intrigued at what I was seeing when Jen grabbed my shoulder from the other couch. She was engulfed in flames and ran from the couch up into my bedroom. I laid on my bed trying to make sense of everything when I saw a man looking in through my window. Unable to make out his face, I was deeply, deeply frightened. It was dark outside, and I was on the second floor. Obviously, this was impossible, but I believed it. I believed that he was there. T+5 hours. Jen opens the door to my room. She shouts something and lays next to me. Her face twisted and turned as I stared, and I couldn't remember where we were. T+8 hours. I must have blacked out because 3 hours had passed and I was still lying with Jen in my bed. Only we were now both naked. Did we have sex? Why was I naked? What happened? I had no explanation, but somehow I didn't seem to need one. We tried to have sex, which is weird in itself since we never had so much as a kiss before this. I was too far gone to know what I was doing, and then I went black again. T+11 hours. I came to, sprawled on my bedroom floor, and now by myself. I noticed a residue on my body, leading me to believe that we did have sex, but Jen was nowhere to be found. I walked into the kitchen looking for her, but there was no kitchen beyond my bedroom door. Instead, I stepped into a supermarket, only it was closed, and there was no food on the shelves. I ran back downstairs into the TV room where I'd last seen Chris. The room was black. I saw nothing but a body hovering in midair. It was Chris, who seemed to be sleeping. T+12 hours. I decided I needed a cigarette, and interestingly enough, I had one in my ear at the time. I smoked it, and took yet another one from my now reloaded ear. Where on earth were these coming from, I wondered. T+13 hours. I grew tired, but I still hadn't found Jen. I walked upstairs and immediately upon opening the door, needed to lie down. I thought I was in some kind of endless field, and that I was sleeping on the grass. There, I slept for almost 20 hours. T+33 hours. I awoke, still hallucinating. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten there, but it seemed to be a house that wasn't my own. I proceeded into the living room to come across a naked woman, which was Jen. She sat in a chair, talking to nobody. When I entered the room, she saw me and immediately took off running. Where did she go? Who was she? T+35 hours. I needed to leave. I was in a strange house and I was stuck. I ventured into what I thought was a bedroom, but it turned out to be a balcony. On the balcony, I found a man's clothing, but no man. Were these mine? I looked out into the backyard, and there on the ground was a man, naked. Somebody had fallen, but luckily, they had landed in the water. T+36 hours. I proceeded into the next room, intrigued as if I was investigating some deserted mansion. A radio hummed, though I saw no radio. I noticed a sliding glass door to the back and tried to open it. This was a strange door, and I couldn't seem to open it whatsoever. I felt trapped. I knew it was some kind of illusion, so I jumped through it and I was right. There was nothing there, and I was finally outside, free from this prison. There was a truck on the side of the road that I noticed from where I was standing. I decided to hitch a ride and try to get back home. I jumped into the bed of the truck and waited, and shortly thereafter the driver got in and we were off. I laid still so not to attract any attention. when all of a sudden a friend of mine from high school appeared. I hadn't seen him in ages, but he was going to blow my cover. It was then I remembered that I was naked. I didn't want him to see me like this. I tried to close my eyes, but he was still there. I shouted and tried to struggle with him, but he disappeared. T plus unknown hours. The truck stopped and I was found out. The driver got out and saw me. He had no facial features, no mouth, no nose, no eyes. I jumped from the bed and began to run, naked and scared. This is my last memory. There is no further evidence as to what happened after this point, but I awoke hours later, finally somewhat sober. I opened my eyes and there were 3 people staring at me. I was naked, bleeding, and covered in my own feces. I huddled in the corner of whatever room I was in. It was a family. They found me and tried to keep me safe. I was in southern New Hampshire, after starting in Maine. I was almost 3 hours from my home with no recollection of how I got there at all. The family offered me clothing and enough money to take the bus back home. Aftermath. I returned home to find my house in ruins. The sliding glass door I had imagined was my bedroom window. Chris was lying on the ground in my yard after falling from the 2nd floor. He had no clothing on, but he was alive, even if he had broke his right leg. I found Jen in my bathtub, still naked and sleeping. My entire life was hysteria for 48 hours. I'm not sure how all 3 of us survived that trip. The Doom Train, a 25i NBOME and Salvia Divinorum trip report by M, posted to earbud.org March 8, 2018. Well into a pretty heavy 25i NBOME trip, I decided to take a teensy tiny little hit of 25x Salvia that was bestowed upon me through some fortune. Exhaling, I laid back and felt all the oncomings of this. Immediately I noticed the intense, sharp geometric and orderly visuals of the N-bomb beginning to morph and round off at the edges, becoming more animated, organic and fluid, and went much further in depth. There was a real life and meaning to it now, aside from pretty colours and shapes. Along with this, I felt the presence of someone, or more than one maybe. Some unseen hand unfolding and revealing various pages of this reality for me. It was like a circus joker figure-esque thing, in the corners of my perception, manipulating the world in front of me, turning the pages. I started feeling I was in a great festival of life in all the universe. From out of the corners of my perception, I felt the warm company of others dancing, morphing and frolicking around me. There was a very feminine presence to it all. The soul of womanly things surrounding me, welcoming me to this world. I giggled and felt joyous. I sat in this experience not feeling too out of place, as otherworldly as it all seemed. Slowly, the salvia wore off and I was back into my N-bomb world. Now, the N-bomb world didn't seem so intense or deep as I'd thought, compared to this little taste of salvia world. I just had my first trip within a trip. Then, I decided to take a normal hit and hold it in for a good time. Now, I don't know what I was expecting, but this was beyond anything I've ever thought possible as a state of being. Being conscious and witnessing what I did will forever have a lasting impact on my life. So this is my interpretation, putting this to words to the best of my ability, which oddly won't be that difficult compared to trying to describe, say, LSD or mushroom trips. Exhale. Now, I'm expecting something similar to what I just felt earlier, but with a little more zing, so to speak. God, I was wrong. So very wrong. Time freezes and I realise something very big is about to happen. Very big. Oh no, I thought to myself. Too much? Oh, I knew it, this was it. Titanic was about to hit the iceberg. My perception of sound went to flat silence, and all I heard or sensed was this massive machine approaching from far, far away. And by massive, I mean Unicron, planet-devouring massive. Just being aware of it, so big, felt like it sucked all the air out of the room. The vacuum created on a beach before a tsunami. A low rumbling was felt. It rumbled with the force of a great machine that I could feel shaking me. The shaking felt physically real. It approached from the distance, making whirring and whizzing noises here and there. It was so big. I could feel this machine was sweeping a route like a Zamboni or lawnmower. It got extremely close, then whirred off along its path into the great distance, then coming back in a swelling ferocity. To and fro it went. Luckily, I was a little prepped for this from reading some great stories of salvia experiences, and I realised that I was about to be shredded up once the machine made its pass over me. But still, reading about it simply cannot prepare you. I waited, somewhat afraid now, only frightened at how truly serious and big this actually felt. What was it going to do to me? This machine was mowing the lawn around my mind, and it would soon mow over my entire mind. Everything in front of me, in my physical space, began to push towards me. Clutter up like an invisible hand was mashing my room into me. I stared at one spot on my wall by a speaker and a can of beer sitting on top of it, and just waited for it. Felt this machine shredding right past me. I was afraid to look anywhere else, and just waited for it to hit me. Then my turn came. It unzipped the seams of my reality. I saw the cracks open up in the walls and little faces peering back from behind the scenes. The can of beer and speaker became an intersect of where this machine had sliced through, and reality peeled back from floor to ceiling. It was like a knife tearing open a curtain. There were cuts and slashes all over my walls. It was so vivid, just like seeing a knife tearing through a curtain, but with more fluidity than clothiness. The beer can had a face now like a cartoon. It was alive. All the objects and anything near these torn edges had faces and life to it. Little cartoon characters of sorts. I literally saw the fabric of reality rip open and the borders around and in it come to life. And when I looked into the other side, it was almost like, oops, you weren't supposed to see that. No data written here yet. I wasn't sure, but looking into or out of my room, I saw these puppeteers holding my room together. Chameleon-like, camouflaged ninja people posed and stretched out on all sides of the walls and corners, holding it together in disguise, a bit like they were supporting a front or a hoax. When I noticed them, they shapeshifted and acrobated themselves elsewhere, and the room just disappeared. This was a very brief and bizarre moment, and I had no sense of inside or outside. Was I looking in at this, or was I looking out? It seemed like I was seeing the universe's safeguard of experiencing technical difficulties. Be back with you shortly, while the rest of the program had loaded up. Looking back at this specific part though, I think I was just experiencing a space beyond my 3 dimensions, and couldn't quite come to terms with what it was. I was witnessing the architect of these constructs move about, a bit like I was backstage watching the acts play out. The shredding continued, or so I thought, but then it was just gone suddenly. I was expecting it to get stronger and more intense, but it leveled off and faded out peacefully. Going back a sec, it's important to note, during this shredding phenomena, I could feel a very unique but distinct burning sensation on all the edges this machine was cutting, like open wounds. It felt like a fire to me, but not painful, just a fiery feeling in evenly cut folds. Then I realised that was it. I'm in Salvia world now, all in. It wasn't that bad after all. It was just that serious impending onset of something huge about to happen that took me aback. But once I was there, I felt okay. I also felt taxed, like I'd reached the top of a mountain after a strenuous climb. I lay at the peak, exhausted and overwhelmed. I can't really describe much of the rest. I just saw all of these fantastic inner workings of the nature of reality, all the little souls and people that work all the magic like a circus act. These creatures were very clown-like, nimble, cartwheeling and flipping and flowing here and there. I couldn't quite keep up. They seemed shadowy and elusive. I got a glimpse of all this, and then the high receded. The entire time I just kept saying, "Wow, oh my God," to myself over and over. I had no idea. Wow. I didn't know it could be this big. At this point, I was just in too much awe to try to make sense of anything. I was just happy to know I got through it all. I called this strong force a machine, mainly because of the sounds and vibrations I was getting from it. It was like a hedge clipper or buzzsaw. It had some very calculated and mechanized notions to it. But at the same time, it was just simply a huge surging force of energy. It was a very defining threshold between realities. One would have to actually experience it to understand how truly massive it feels. It also seemed finite though. I could sense its largeness, which meant it had a size, right? Well, maybe for another time. I know a lot of higher level trips describe being shot out or blasted out into space, whatever decorative words you choose. But for me personally, it felt like it all came to me. I didn't go anywhere. I was here the whole time. But the rest of it blasted into me, or my space I know as reality. Truly one of the most amazing experiences in my life so far. So this is what death looks like. An LSD trip report by White Light. Posted at EARBUDS.org, October 9th, 2010. When it comes to drugs, I can say in all honesty that I'm a very experienced user, despite my young age. I'm now 19 years old. I've had lots of experiences with stimulants, some with depressants, and countless trips in the world of hallucinogenics. I've been introduced to the world of drugs through salvia about 3 years ago. LSD and psilocybin mushrooms have been an important part of my life for about 2 years. The infamous dissociative known as ketamine has been an interesting tool to me, and much more than anything else, I acknowledge the infinite power of DMT about 20 times since I began my experimentations. When this event took place, I was just coming back from a rave party in the city. I was coming down off both MDMA and ketamine. I eventually thought that dropping some LSD could be a good idea. Who the hell would do that just after having drained his serotonin with too much MDMA? I don't know. But anyway, I took the vial from my desk, dropped 2 drops on my hand, and licked it. To be honest, I first thought that 2 doses of good LSD would satisfy me. I'd be able to draw or paint some crazy things while having some nice visuals. But then I thought, is it really worth it to just drop acid to have some cute little visuals? Or should I go for something more interesting? The highest amount I'd ever taken was a dose of about 550 to 700 micrograms. Since there was 5 other drops in the dropper, I decided to take them. I then proceeded to do what everybody who knows a bit about liquid LSD knows you should never do. I replenished the dropper with water and drank it as if it was a shooter. Twice, just to make sure not to waste anything. 1 shooter of a vial gave a trip of about 1,000 micrograms to a friend of mine, and it was the second time that this vial was being washed. It should be important to note that my vial was twice as big as his, and so has more surface in contact with the LSD, and that there was probably a couple more doses in my vial than in his. It could be considered a mistake to wash the vial as I did, but it was on purpose. I didn't really think about it. I just felt like it had to be done. I cleaned my room very fast because I know being on acid in my room, if it's messy, is only going to make me frustrated. I then went for a cigarette in the backyard and sit for a minute. Everything was heavily distorted, but I could still handle it. I thought about all the LSD I dropped, and realised that I had probably around 2,000 micrograms in my body. EARBUDS note: claims of measured microgram dosages for LSD are usually unsupported. Quantitative measurements for LSD are very difficult to do and cannot be done casually. Without further detailed information about how the measurements were derived, it is reasonable to assume that most statements of microgram dosages of LSD on blotter or in microdots are either misinformed or overstated. Blank. I open my eyes and notice I'm back in my room without even remembering going back inside my apartment. I'm lying on my bed, eyes wide open. Nothing is left static. There are some waves of glowing blue light going across the room. Everything looks fluid. I start hearing some kind of chants and melodies alongside that electronic-like drone sound that I'm used to hearing while tripping on DMT. The visuals then stop waving and take a beautiful crystalline form. The world seems to be made of colourful geometric patterns. It really felt like a pre-breakthrough DMT experience, to be honest. This lasts for about 30 minutes. I then close my eyes, and I'm totally blinded by what many people call the white light. It's beautiful, but so intense. I'm not sure anymore I will be able to handle this experience. And this is where it starts to get bad. When I open my eyes, my room has stopped distorting and the colours are gone. The room is not back to normal. Worse, it looks like everything is grey and sad. There is a distinct substancelessness to everything. The whole world looks like it just died, as if the energy present in everything had just gone. I try to get up out of my bed and go somewhere happier, but I sit up on my bed and feel myself falling into an infinite void only to find myself lying again. Images are duplicating, repeating themselves, without meaning. I put my hands on my chest and try to relax, but it feels like my hands simply go through me as if I was non-existent, empty of any matter. My heart was beating at an incredibly fast rate. I started thinking that I'd found two absolute laws of the universe that were totally contradictory, acting as a proof that reality was a lie, an illusion created out of my own consciousness. In fact, there was nothing at all. Nothing but solitude in my own consciousness and lies. My brain, being now aware that everything was fake, made everything look fake, dead, and empty. Was that death? I wish death was more like a lack of consciousness, a complete calm darkness. But this death was much more like a purgatory, grey and rotten. My roommate came into my room and asked me if I was okay. He wasn't aware I was on acid. In my head though, it looked more like he was shouting at me. Being the consciousness from which reality emerged from, I had destroyed every human being in my world by destroying the illusion. This is why he was kind of frustrated. He went out of the apartment laughing. I felt bad, for I'd messed up big time, and now I know that I had killed everything I knew. All I had left was my room, which I wanted to go away from with all my heart. While still lying on my bed, I started losing every feeling of my body. It felt like I was losing contact only to be lost in this room as a dead spirit. Every hope left me. Some weird experimental drum and bass started playing in another room. Complete, clear, precise audio hallucination. It sounded like my consciousness was glitching out, lagging. But then suddenly it stopped. Everything came back to life all at once. I got an awareness of my body again. The colours and the visual hallucinations came back. Everything was moving again, alive. All these sensations coming back at the same time made me think I was genuinely going to explode. But I felt warm again. My other roommate eventually came to see me, and when I told him how my trip went, he got me an antidepressant, some kind of dopamine stabilizer or something like this. It just did it to make sure I had no other problem, even though the trip was pretty much finished. Everything after this was kinda quiet. Well, this was obviously the most intense LSD experience I ever had, and maybe that I will ever have. Sure, I will drop LSD again, but maybe not that much at the same time. But you never know. I've seen what I needed to see, and even if it wasn't very pleasant, I believe it is those kind of experiences that teach you the most. I've been gifted with the amazing phenomenon that is called life. For some time, it felt like it had been taken away from me. Now that I have it back, I know that I have the power to make anything I want out of it.